Air in the grand auditorium was thick with excitement as the final round of the Young Innovators Science competition began. The audience, a mix of scientists, engineers, and media moguls, buzzed with anticipation. But no one expected what was about to happen next. Emma Larkins, a 9-year-old girl with dark curls falling over her serious eyes, stepped onto the stage. Clad in a simple but polished outfit, her mom had insisted on something professional. She stood tall, her heart pounding with the weight of the moment. For someone her age, the event should have felt overwhelming, but Emma had always been different. Ever since she could remember, her mind was filled with complex problems and simple solutions, as if her brain was wired for questions and answers no one else had dared to ask. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? She adjusted the microphone, her small hands slightly trembling, and stared at the sea of faces in front of her. Behind her, on the large screen, was an image of her invention. A machine that could capture carbon from the air and convert it into a form of energy. Her heart raced, but her voice remained steady as she began her presentation. "Good afternoon, esteemed judges and guests," Emma started, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Emma Larkins, and I am here today to present a solution to one of the world's most pressing challenges, climate change." The audience sat in rapt attention, waiting for her next words. Emma's confidence built as she spoke, each sentence gaining more momentum. She explained how, over the past year, she had worked tirelessly to design a machine based on the natural process of photosynthesis, one that could filter the air, capturing carbon dioxide and turning it into a clean, usable form of energy. Emma paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. She could feel the eyes of the audience on her, but there was one pair of eyes that seemed to hold a magnetic pull, Elon Musk's. He had been sitting quietly in the back, his usual aloof demeanor replaced by an intense, almost puzzling, focus. To Emma, it felt like the rest of the world had blurred, and only Elon Musk, the visionary behind Tesla and SpaceX, was real. She had read about him in her books, watched his speeches, and dreamed about the possibility of one day speaking to him about her ideas. But today, that dream was not just a fantasy, it was happening in real time. Elon leaned forward, his usual smirk gone. His eyes followed every movement of Emma's hands, every flicker of data that appeared behind her on the screen. It was clear he wasn't just listening. He was interested. Emma could tell. "Imagine," she continued, "a world where our cities don't just consume energy, but also create it, where our power plants aren't just factories of pollution, but machines that reverse the damage done to our planet." There was a brief silence in the room as the enormity of her words hung in the air. It wasn't just the science, it was the audacity of it, the hope in her voice. The dream of a world where young minds could actually change the course of history. As Emma finished her presentation and stepped away from the podium, the auditorium erupted into applause. But before the noise could fully settle, a new sound cut through the room: footsteps. Slowly, deliberately, Elon Musk stood and began to walk toward the stage. The audience fell into a hushed murmur, eyes widening as the world's most famous tech mogul approached the small girl at the center of it all. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Was he coming to congratulate her? Or was he about to dismiss her like the many others who had doubted her? But as he reached the stage, Elon Musk stopped and offered her a rare, almost reverent smile. He extended his hand, a gesture of respect, and Emma took it. The grip was firm, yet gentle. "You've done something remarkable," Elon said, his voice both calm and loaded with a kind of excitement Emma hadn't expected. This could be the breakthrough the world needs. "You've caught my attention." Emma felt a surge of adrenaline. Was this real? Did Elon Musk, the man who had revolutionized electric cars and space travel, just say those words to her? "Thank you, Mr. Musk," Emma replied, her voice steadier than she felt inside. "I believe this invention can make a real difference. If we can make this work, we could reverse the damage to our atmosphere." Elon's smile widened. "I'm intrigued, Emma. Tell me more. What's next for this project?" The audience remained silent, watching the interaction unfold in disbelief. But none of them, least of all Emma, had any idea how this moment would change everything. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the back of the auditorium. It was the host of the competition, a middle-aged man who was clearly flustered by the unexpected turn of events. Mr. Musk, we weren't expecting questions just yet." But Elon held up a hand, silencing him. His attention was completely on Emma now. "What you've done here today, young lady," he said, his eyes locked with hers, "could change the future. I want to help you. But first, we need to see how this invention performs under real-world conditions. Are you ready for that?" The words hit Emma like a tidal wave. She had spent months, no, years, dreaming of this opportunity, and now it was here, standing right in front of her. But before she could fully process it, Elon added, with a wink, "I think we could make history together." The crowd watched in stunned silence as Emma's mind raced. This wasn't just a competition anymore. This was the beginning of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. Something that could change the world. But was she ready? Could a 9-year-old girl, who had once struggled to finish her science homework, now take on the world's most pressing issue? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emma could almost hear the echo of the words she had written for her online profile. But now, the question felt real. She would need every ounce of that drive to see this through. She nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes, Mr. Musk, let's make this work." As the audience erupted into applause, Emma knew one thing for sure. Her life had just changed forever, and the journey ahead would test everything she had ever believed about herself. Emma Larkins had always been different. From the moment she could walk, she was drawn to the world around her. Not just to play with toys like the other kids, but to figure out how things worked. Her mother, Olivia, would often find Emma disassembling the family's old vacuum cleaner, determined to understand the mechanics of the motor. Of course, that usually meant weeks of dust bunnies and a floor that had to wait for its turn to be cleaned. But Olivia wasn't bothered. She encouraged Emma's curiosity, even if it meant a bit of chaos around the house. "I swear, you were born with a screwdriver in your hand," Olivia would laugh as she patched up broken appliances, telling her daughter stories about inventors and great minds who had started with nothing but an idea and a will to understand. At the age of 3, Emma was reading books that Olivia hadn't seen in years, books about space, biology, and physics. They were books meant for teens or adults, but Emma devoured them as if they were simple picture books. Her mind worked like a sponge, absorbing everything and anything that might explain how the world worked. At 4, she could name the planets in the solar system in order and recite the periodic table. By the time she was 6, she had already read all the science fiction books Olivia had on her shelf. By 8, Emma had moved beyond fiction, diving into real-world problems. And the problem that kept her awake at night was the same one she had heard on the news over and over again. Climate change? The Larkins' home was a modest one, a 2-bedroom apartment tucked into a quiet corner of Los Angeles. Olivia was a schoolteacher at a local public school, teaching 8th grade science to children much older than her daughter. Emma's father had left when she was still a toddler, and though Olivia had tried her best to give Emma a full and happy life, it wasn't always easy. Money was tight, and sometimes Emma could see the strain in her mother's eyes, even though Olivia tried her best to hide it. "Mom, do you think I could build a machine that helps the planet?" Emma asked one evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table, eating homemade spaghetti. Olivia, looking tired from a long day of teaching, smiled and placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "If anyone could do it, I think it would be you, honey. Just keep your heart in it, and never stop believing you can make a difference." Those words stuck with Emma. Every day, she would hear her mother's encouragement in her mind. But beyond that, there was something else that pushed her, an internal drive to make things right. Emma couldn't ignore the stories she heard of wildfires raging through California, flooding in cities, and smog thick enough to choke the air. She had been learning about carbon emissions, the greenhouse effect, and how human activity was altering the planet. And yet, despite all the doom and gloom, there was an undeniable spark of hope in her heart. She could help. She started with small projects, building miniature windmills from spare parts she found in her mom's garage. Those early experiments were far from perfect, but they gave Emma the experience and the confidence to keep going. The breakthrough came when she was 9. After months of research, late nights spent in front of her computer, and long afternoons in the garage, Emma figured out how to harness the power of photosynthesis in a new way. She realized it was possible to capture carbon emissions from the air and turn them into clean, usable energy. It was simple, almost too simple, but that was the beauty of it. Emma wasn't trying to invent a new kind of fuel or energy source. She was trying to learn from nature itself, to mimic the processes that plants had been using for millions of years. Her idea was a machine, a carbon converter, as she called it, that would absorb carbon dioxide from the air and, using an engineered photosynthetic process, convert it into energy. Emma had designed it in her room, sketching the concepts on paper, building tiny models out of Legos, and testing them with various materials. Her science kit, which she'd received as a birthday gift when she was 7, had quickly become her most prized possession. She used it every day, mixing chemicals, testing reactions, and refining her theories. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A small, simple start that could grow into something world-changing. And now, here she was, standing in front of the most powerful people in science, including Elon Musk. The gravity of it all made her stomach twist, but the fire inside her kept burning. This was her moment to show them what she could do. Behind her, her mother Olivia had watched with pride from the audience, her heart swelling. She knew Emma had always been special, but this was the moment she'd hoped for, even if she'd never fully believed it could come. Olivia had raised her daughter to be strong and independent, to believe in herself even when others doubted her. And now, in front of a crowd of the brightest minds on earth, Emma was proving that anything was possible. The applause still ringing in her ears, Emma took one last look at her invention on the screen behind her. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was something that could change the world, and it was her idea. The thought was almost too much to process, but she wasn't about to stop now. A part of her wondered if this was just the beginning of something bigger. Maybe, just maybe, she could solve the climate crisis. Maybe she could actually make a difference. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. If anyone could do it, I think it would be you, honey. It was a voice Emma trusted. And for the first time in her life, Emma truly believed that maybe, just maybe, she could change the world. The applause that had followed Emma's presentation was still echoing in her ears as she walked backstage, her mind racing. She had done it. She had actually stood in front of Elon Musk and the world's most brilliant innovators and presented her idea. But as the stage lights dimmed and the crowd's cheers faded, the reality of the moment began to settle in. Backstage, Emma could hear the buzz of excited voices, the murmurs of admiration and disbelief. But there was something else too, whispers of doubt, even skepticism. Can a 9-year-old really understand the complexities of climate change? Someone murmured. That idea? It's bold, but too simple. Is it even feasible? Another voice asked. Emma's heart sank as she overheard these comments. She had always known that her age would make people question her ideas. After all, she was just a child. How could she, someone so young, tackle a problem that had baffled scientists and governments for decades? But as the whispers continued, Emma's mind flashed to Elon Musk's words. You've done something remarkable. This could change the future. That was the only thing she needed to hold on to. She pushed the doubts aside, shaking her head. The truth was, the skepticism didn't matter. What mattered was the technology she had created. The carbon converter. It worked, and it had the potential to change everything. Emma, a voice called out. It was her mother, Olivia, rushing toward her with a huge grin on her face. Emma's face lit up when she saw her mom. Olivia pulled her into a tight hug. You were amazing up there. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Mom, Emma replied, trying to hide the flicker of uncertainty in her voice. But did you hear what some of them were saying? They think it's too simple, that it can't work. Olivia pulled back, looking her daughter in the eye. Sweetheart, don't let them get to you. The world doesn't always understand brilliance when it first appears. But your idea is solid. I believe in it, and I believe in you. Do you remember what I've always told you? Emma nodded. That if I keep going, I can make a difference. Exactly, Olivia said, her voice steady and reassuring. Now let's take a deep breath. We've come so far, and this is only the beginning. Let's see what happens next. Before Emma could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. It was the event organizer, a man named Greg, who had helped orchestrate the competition. He was beaming, his face full of excitement. "Emma, Olivia," Greg said, his voice practically bubbling with enthusiasm. "That was incredible. Truly. But I need to get you both over to the green room. Elon Musk has requested a meeting." At those words, Emma's heart skipped a beat. Elon Musk? He had requested to meet with her? Her mother's eyes widened with surprise. "What? Are you serious?" Greg nodded, looking thrilled. "He wants to talk to Emma about her invention. This is a big deal, folks. Let's go." As they made their way toward the green room, Emma's nerves returned full force. What could Elon Musk possibly want with her? Was he going to offer her a partnership? Or was he just being polite, maybe humoring a child who had dared to dream? But as the door to the green room opened, Emma was greeted by a sight that almost knocked the wind out of her. There, sitting on a couch in the corner, was Elon Musk himself. He looked exactly as she had imagined, sharp, focused, and more intense than any picture or video could convey. But there was something else in his eyes, too, curiosity. He was leaning forward, his hands clasped together, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. When he saw Emma, his face lit up, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Emma," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "I'm glad we could meet in person." Emma's throat tightened, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Mr. Musk, thank you for taking the time to talk to me." Elon raised a hand, cutting her off. "Please call me Elon. What you've created is far too important for formalities." He motioned for her to sit beside him. Emma sat down on the edge of the couch, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Olivia stood in the doorway, watching quietly, but Emma could tell her mother was just as nervous as she was. "I've been following the developments in carbon capture technologies for years," Elon began, leaning back in his seat. "There are a lot of smart people working on it, but the problem is, we haven't seen anything truly revolutionary. Until now." Emma blinked. Was he serious? Was he saying her idea could be revolutionary? "You found a way to mimic the process of photosynthesis," he continued. "But what excites me the most is how simple it is. It's elegant in its simplicity. That's the kind of solution the world needs. But there's a catch, of course." Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. "The catch? You're young," Elon said, his gaze piercing, "and there are going to be a lot of people who will doubt you, even ridicule you. They'll say you're too inexperienced to take on a problem like this. You'll have to prove yourself every step of the way." Emma felt a surge of determination wash over her. She had been preparing for this moment for her entire life. She wasn't going to let anything, or anyone, stop her. "I'm ready," she said firmly. "I know it won't be easy, but I believe in this. And I believe I can make a difference." Elon's eyes softened just a fraction, as if he was seeing something in her that he didn't expect. "I like that," he said quietly. "That's the spirit of someone who changes the world. I want to work with you, Emma. Let's take your invention to the next level." Her breath caught in her throat. "Work with me?" Before she could speak, Elon stood up and extended his hand to her. "Welcome to the team." The weight of Elon Musk's words lingered in Emma's mind as she sat in the green room, still absorbing the shock of it all. Welcome to the team. She had always dreamed of working with someone like Elon Musk, someone whose vision had already reshaped industries. But now, as the reality began to settle in, Emma knew that joining his team wasn't going to be easy. It wouldn't be all about accolades and breakthroughs. It was going to be about hard work, relentless testing, and overcoming challenges no one her age had ever faced before. She looked up at Elon, who was now seated across from her, studying her with a calm but intense gaze. He seemed to have an uncanny way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. For a moment, Emma felt like she could breathe again, as if his presence alone could anchor her in the whirlwind of her thoughts. "So, what's the next step?" she asked, her voice steady but eager. Elon smiled, a faint glimmer of approval in his eyes. "Well, We need to figure out if your invention works on a larger scale. You've demonstrated the concept, but now we need to take it from theory to reality. That's where the real challenge begins. Emma nodded. I've already made some small-scale models, but I haven't been able to scale it up yet. The carbon converter works well in my lab, but I know I'll need help with the materials and technology to make it bigger, more efficient. You're thinking in the right direction, Elon said, but there's more to it. It's not just about scaling the technology. It's about integrating it into existing systems, energy grids, power plants, carbon capture sites. We'll need to partner with industry leaders, test the technology in real-world conditions, and iterate quickly. Time is critical, and the world can't afford to wait for us to get it right after years of trial and error. Emma felt a wave of nerves roll over her, but she pushed it down. I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes. Elon leaned forward, his eyes focused. That's the spirit. But remember, this isn't going to be a smooth ride. There will be a lot of people who will try to tear you down, either because they don't believe in you, or because they'll see your invention as a threat to their industries. You'll need to be tough, and you'll need to keep your mind open. Don't get attached to one version of your idea. The world will change as we work on it, and you'll need to adapt. Emma took a deep breath. She had always been able to adapt, whether it was through trial and error in her childhood experiments or learning new things at a rapid pace. But this was different. This was the kind of work that could change everything. The responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders. Do you really think it can work? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I mean, can my invention really make a difference in the fight against climate change? Elon's gaze softened, and he nodded. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in you, Emma. But you'll need to believe in yourself, too. You've already proven you have the mind for it. Now, it's about proving you have the resilience to make it happen. Emma smiled, a wave of warmth spreading through her. It was as though everything she had dreamed of, everything she had fought for, was finally within reach. This wasn't just a chance to prove herself. It was a chance to change the world. And she wasn't going to waste it. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Elon Musk arranged for Emma to work with a team of engineers, scientists, and specialists from Tesla and SpaceX. They were some of the brightest minds in the world, and though Emma was nervous at first, she quickly found her footing. The team welcomed her with a mix of curiosity and admiration, but also skepticism. She was, after all, just a 9-year-old girl. How could she possibly contribute to something as monumental as revolutionizing the way the world approached energy and climate change? But Emma was determined to prove them wrong. The first step was refining her carbon converter design. With Elon's team's help, they worked to enhance the efficiency of the photosynthetic process she had designed. They tested various materials, chemical reactions, and components, gradually improving the machine's ability to capture carbon dioxide and convert it into usable energy. Every day, Emma sat with the engineers, learning how to navigate advanced concepts like thermodynamics and chemical engineering, concepts that had once seemed out of her reach. At first, the challenges felt overwhelming. Some days, nothing seemed to work. Parts of the machine malfunctioned, and the data they collected didn't match their expectations. But Emma refused to give up. Every setback became an opportunity to learn, and every failure was just another step toward success. With every iteration, the technology got better. Still, the doubts never fully disappeared. One afternoon, Emma sat in a meeting room at Tesla's headquarters, surrounded by engineers and data analysts. The conversation had grown tense as they discussed the scalability of the carbon converter. We've run the numbers, and honestly, Emma's idea might not be feasible on a global scale, one of the engineers said, adjusting his glasses. The energy output isn't sufficient to support large-scale deployment. We're talking about a huge investment of time and resources for something that might only make a small impact. Emma's heart sank, but she refused to let the words crush her. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with determination. I know it's not perfect, she said quietly, but with a confidence that made everyone pause. But what if we're not looking at it the right way? What if it's not about just scaling it up immediately, but about integrating it into existing systems, like power plants or even vehicles, so we can start reducing emissions as we build up capacity? Elon, who had been silent during the conversation, finally spoke up. She's got a point. It's about incremental progress. The system doesn't need to replace everything at once. We start small, learn from the process, and grow from there. Emma's idea is worth exploring further. The room fell silent as the engineers absorbed Elon's words. They had been so focused on the grand scale that they hadn't considered the possibility of taking smaller, strategic steps. Emma's idea might have started small, but the potential was enormous. As the meeting wrapped up, Elon turned to Emma and gave her an approving nod. "You're on the right track. Keep pushing us to think differently." Emma smiled, her confidence growing. The path ahead was still uncertain, but she was starting to realize something. The bigger the challenge, the bigger the opportunity, and she was more than ready to face whatever came next. Emma had never expected the journey to be easy, but she had always believed in the power of persistence. The past few weeks had been filled with long hours at Tesla's headquarters and late nights in the lab. As she worked with Elon's team, she quickly learned that being young and brilliant didn't guarantee an easy path. There were far more hurdles than she had imagined, and they were only getting bigger. The biggest challenge they faced was scalability. While Emma's carbon converter worked perfectly in small models, when they attempted to expand it for large-scale use, the machine struggled. The chemical process behind Emma's invention was too slow when applied to large amounts of carbon dioxide, and the energy output was insufficient to compete with existing methods. The team had run hundreds of tests, and still, the results weren't promising. Emma's hope began to waver. Every day felt like a step backward, every failure a reminder that she was just a child in a world of seasoned experts. Some of the engineers started suggesting that the idea wasn't feasible. Others questioned whether it was even worth pursuing. One afternoon, after another disappointing round of tests, Emma walked into the lab to find Elon staring at the data with a furrowed brow. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Hey, Elon," she said, trying to mask the uncertainty in her voice. "What's going on?" He motioned to the data on the screen, which showed the energy output of the most recent carbon converter model. The numbers were dismal. "I'm afraid we've hit a wall," Elon said, his voice quiet but firm. "We've done everything we can to scale this up, but we're not getting the results we need. I think we have to face the possibility that this idea won't work on the level we were hoping for." Emma's heart sank. She had been pushing herself, working non-stop to make this breakthrough, and now it felt like everything was slipping away. "But it can work," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I know it can. We just need more time, more resources. We're missing something, Elon. I can feel it." Elon looked at her for a long moment, then stood up and walked over to the whiteboard. "I know you're passionate about this, Emma, and I admire your drive. But sometimes, even the best ideas need to evolve before they can succeed. Please, don't give up on it," she pleaded. "If we just keep looking, we'll find the key." "I know it." Elon paused, studying her carefully. After a long silence, he sighed and wiped the whiteboard clean. "I'm not giving up on you, Emma, but this won't be easy. You've been working with this concept for so long. Maybe you need a fresh perspective. You've hit a plateau. Perhaps it's time for a new approach." Emma didn't like the sound of that. A new approach? What if that meant abandoning everything she had worked for? What if the solution was already within reach, but they were too close to see it? But instead of arguing, she nodded. "I understand. I'll keep thinking." As she left the lab that day, Emma's mind was in turmoil. The thought of abandoning her invention was unbearable. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of something monumental, that one small adjustment could make all the difference. But if Elon thought it was time to rethink everything, maybe he was right. That night, as Emma lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, she couldn't stop thinking about the problem. The carbon converter, despite its flaws, was built on a brilliant idea. It worked in theory. It just needed refinement. She had to find the missing link. Then it hit her. What if it's not about the chemical process alone? She muttered to herself. What if it's about how the energy is stored? What if we could use the process in a way that doesn't require immediate large-scale power output? Emma shot up in bed, her mind racing. What if, instead of trying to use the carbon converter to generate power directly, they could capture the carbon and store it in a way that could be used later? What if they could create a system that filtered carbon from the air, stored it, and then used it as a fuel source when needed. The idea was radical, but it felt right. She grabbed her notebook from the nightstand and began sketching feverishly, her hand moving faster than her mind could follow. Hours passed as she worked through the new concept in her head, refining her idea. By morning, she had a new design for the carbon converter, one that was centered around carbon storage and delayed energy release, rather than immediate energy generation. The process wasn't about transforming carbon into energy instantly. It was about harnessing it for later use, when the world was ready for it. The next day, Emma couldn't wait to present her new idea. She rushed into the lab, her heart pounding with excitement. She found Elon at his desk, going over some data, and approached him without hesitation. "I think I've figured it out," Emma said breathlessly. Elon looked up, his eyes lighting up with interest. "Go on." "I've been thinking about it all night," she began, pulling out her sketches. "What if the problem isn't that the converter can't produce enough power on its own? What if it's that we're trying to do too much too quickly? What if we start by capturing the carbon and storing it in a way that can be used later? That way, we can focus on scalability without worrying about energy output right away." Elon studied the sketches closely, his brow furrowed in thought. Emma watched anxiously, holding her breath. "This is different," Elon said slowly. "It's not what I expected, but it's interesting. You've taken the focus off immediate energy generation and shifted it to storage. That might give us more flexibility in scaling the technology." Emma's heart raced. Could this actually be it? Had she just found the breakthrough they needed? Elon turned to the rest of the team, who had gathered around to hear Emma's pitch. "What do you think?" he asked, looking at them one by one. The engineers exchanged glances, some intrigued, others cautious. One of them, a senior scientist named Dr. Isaac Chan, spoke up. "It's unconventional, but I think it could work. Storing the carbon and using it later could open up a whole new set of possibilities. It might even allow us to integrate this technology into industries that rely on carbon-intensive processes." Elon smiled, a glint of approval in his eyes. "This is why I brought you on board, Emma. You think outside the box. Let's test this. Let's see where it takes us." Emma's pulse quickened. It was the validation she had been waiting for. Her idea was now more than just a concept. It was a real possibility. And with Elon and his team behind her, it had the potential to become a game changer. The buzz in the Tesla lab was palpable. After Emma's breakthrough idea, the new carbon converter design that focused on storage rather than immediate energy output, there was a renewed sense of purpose in the air. It was like the team had been given a fresh wind to carry them forward, and every member of the team, from the engineers to the scientists, was eager to see where this new direction would take them. Elon Musk, who had remained unusually quiet after Emma's pitch, was the first to give the go-ahead. He gathered the team in one of the main testing rooms and announced, "We're going to give this a shot. Emma's idea deserves testing, and it might just be the edge we've been looking for. Let's move fast and find out if this can scale." Emma had been listening to the exchange with barely contained excitement. She was no longer the young girl with a dream. She was now an integral part of a groundbreaking team, one that could potentially change the course of history. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. With Elon's leadership and the incredible resources available at Tesla, they quickly assembled a new prototype based on Emma's carbon storage idea. The first test came swiftly. The team had designed a small, scaled-down version of the new carbon converter prototype that could capture and store CO2 from the air. The energy capture mechanism was relatively simple. Carbon would be absorbed into a special material, then stored in an advanced reactor that could release the energy when triggered. It was a concept that could theoretically work, but there was no guarantee that it would scale up or be efficient enough to make a significant impact. Emma stood in the back of the testing room, nervously clutching her notebook, as Elon and the team prepared the prototype. She was both excited and terrified. What if it didn't work? What if she had misunderstood something crucial? The pressure was almost unbearable. The testing team flipped the switch. The machine hummed to life, its lights flickering as it began absorbing carbon dioxide from the air. For a moment, it seemed like everything was working. The team watched the monitors as the converter began pulling in CO2, and Emma's heart soared. But then the first signs of trouble appeared. The system started to overheat. The carbon storage material was breaking down faster than expected, and the energy output was far less than what they had projected. The hum of the machine grew louder and more erratic before finally sputtering and shutting down altogether. Emma's stomach dropped. The room went silent. Everyone was staring at the machine, then at each other. "Well, that didn't go as planned," Elon said, his voice calm but tinged with disappointment. "We're missing something," one of the engineers said, stepping forward to examine the prototype. "The storage material isn't durable enough. It's not holding the carbon the way we need it to." Emma's heart raced as she watched the engineers take apart the machine. She couldn't help but feel responsible. This was her idea, after all. What had gone wrong? Elon turned toward her, his face unreadable. "Emma, this isn't a failure. It's part of the process. We knew this wouldn't be easy. The idea is still sound. We just need to refine it." The sting of failure was sharp, but Emma nodded. She knew Elon was right. The road to progress was filled with setbacks, and this was only one step on a much longer journey. "Don't worry," she said, trying to shake off the tension. "We'll figure it out. We always do." Elon gave her a small, approving smile. "I like that attitude. Let's go back to the drawing board." The next few weeks were a test of Emma's resilience. With each failed prototype, the team worked tirelessly, tweaking the storage materials, improving the capture process, and reworking the energy release mechanisms. Emma spent long hours with the engineers, offering ideas and learning the intricacies of the technology. She had her hands full with schoolwork as well, but her dedication to the project only grew stronger. She was no longer just a curious young girl with a good idea. She was now a key player in the development of a potential climate solution. It wasn't all failure, though. Small wins kept the team moving forward. After several adjustments, they found a material that held the carbon longer without breaking down. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step closer. They also figured out a way to integrate the carbon converter with existing infrastructure, such as power grids and factories, allowing the stored energy to be released when needed. But the real breakthrough came one evening when Emma was working late, alone in the lab. She had been experimenting with a new type of catalyst, an additive that could speed up the carbon absorption process without sacrificing efficiency. It was a risky idea, but Emma's instincts told her it was worth trying. After hours of careful testing, she finally saw a result that made her heart skip a beat. The machine was absorbing carbon faster than ever before without overheating or breaking down. The catalyst worked. She rushed to the testing room and flipped the switch to run a full-scale test. This time, when the machine hummed to life, it didn't sputter. The monitors displayed a steady flow of carbon absorption, and the energy output was steady as well. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was by far the best result they had seen. Emma couldn't contain her excitement. She ran to Elon's office and burst in without knocking. "Elon, I think I found the solution," she exclaimed. Elon looked up from his desk, his face lighting up with curiosity. "What's going on?" Emma practically ran over to his side and showed him the data. "It's the catalyst. I think it's the missing piece. The carbon converter is working faster than it ever has. We're getting closer to scaling it up." Elon leaned forward, scanning the data, his face a picture of concentration. When he finally looked up, there was a spark of something in his eyes, hope. "This is good, Emma. Very good. Let's refine it and test it on a larger scale. We might just have something here." As Emma's team worked on the next stage of testing, word of their progress began to leak out. The idea of a young inventor revolutionizing climate change solutions had captured the public's imagination. The media was buzzing, and soon Elon Musk and his team were preparing for a major press conference. The date was set. Emma, Elon, and the team would announce their progress in front of the world. For Emma, the thought of standing before a global audience was overwhelming. She had never imagined her idea would reach such heights, let alone become something that could change the entire world. The pressure was mounting, but she reminded herself of why she started this journey in the first place. It wasn't for the fame. It wasn't for the recognition. It was for the planet. As the day of the press conference arrived, Emma stood with Elon at the podium, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The room was packed with reporters, scientists, and climate activists, all eager to hear the announcement. "Good afternoon, everyone," Elon began, his voice calm but authoritative. "Today, we stand on the brink of a revolution. With Emma's groundbreaking invention, we are one step closer to solving one of the world's most pressing challenges, climate change. Her carbon converter, now equipped with the catalyst, is on its way to being scalable, and with it, we hope to change the way the world deals with carbon emissions. Emma stepped forward, her nerves fading as she spoke. "This isn't just my idea," she said, her voice steady. "It's a team effort. We've all worked together to make this a reality. But we're not done yet. We still have a long way to go. But I believe, if we keep working, we can make a difference. We can help save our planet." The room erupted in applause. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. The press conference had been a whirlwind. The world was watching Emma now. No longer just a young inventor, she was the face of a potential global breakthrough in the fight against climate change. Headlines across the world buzzed with her name. The girl who could save the planet, teen inventor's breakthrough could transform climate solutions, and Tesla's new carbon converter. The future of clean energy? Emma had always been a private person. The thought of being in the public was both thrilling and terrifying. Now, as the days passed after the press conference, the weight of her new role started to sink in. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. On social media, she received messages from climate activists, scientists, and even young students who were inspired by her work. It was incredible, but it was also overwhelming. Elon was at her side every step of the way, guiding her through the media blitz and helping her stay grounded. He was the one who made the decision to take her idea public, and as always, he seemed unfazed by the sudden attention. But Emma wasn't sure how she felt about it yet. The world was now watching her, and that brought a lot of pressure. What if she failed? What if this whole thing fell apart? In the weeks following the press conference, the pressure started to build. The Tesla lab was busier than ever. The team worked around the clock, optimizing Emma's carbon converter design. They were getting closer to a scalable solution, but there were still significant challenges to overcome. The carbon converter had to be efficient, durable, and cost-effective, and they were still struggling with the cost and production time of the catalyst Emma had developed. Emma knew that every failure, every test that didn't work as expected, was now under a microscope. The media and the public were holding their breath, waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. One evening, as Emma sat at her desk, reviewing some new test data, Elon walked in, looking unusually serious. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but firm. Emma looked up, her heart racing. "What's going on?" "It's about the scalability," Elon said, sitting down across from her. "The team has identified some major hurdles in ramping up the production. The cost of the new catalyst, combined with the materials we need for the converter, might make it unfeasible for large-scale use in the near future." Emma's stomach tightened. "But we're so close. We can't stop now. There has to be a way to fix it." Elon nodded. "I agree. We've made huge progress, and we're not giving up on it. But we need to be honest with ourselves. If we can't figure out how to bring down costs and improve efficiency in the next few months, we might not be able to move forward." The words hit Emma like a ton of bricks. "What are we talking about here, Elon? Another few months of testing? A few more years of research?" Elon didn't sugarcoat it. "It could be years. Or we might have to pivot to a new solution altogether. I'm not saying we give up, but I'm saying we need a plan B." The idea of pivoting was something Emma hadn't even considered. She had worked so hard to get to this point. The thought of abandoning her invention felt impossible, yet the reality was staring her in the face. She couldn't ignore it. The whole world had their eyes on her, waiting for the next big step. What would happen if she couldn't deliver? The pressure kept mounting. Emma spent the next few days barely sleeping. She would wake up in the middle of the night, her mind racing, the weight of the world on her shoulders. She knew the stakes were high, not just for her but for the entire planet. If they couldn't scale this technology, the hopes of reducing carbon emissions on a massive scale would fade. The fight against climate change would continue to be a fight with no real solution. One evening, as she sat alone in the lab, staring at the data, she began to feel an overwhelming sense of doubt. What if it wasn't meant to be? What if all of this, her idea, her hard work, the endless hours, was just a dream? A dream that was too big for someone her age. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her mother. "Hey, sweetie, I know you're probably swamped, but just wanted to remind you how proud I am of you. Keep pushing forward. We're all rooting for you." Emma read the message a few times, the words sinking in. Her mother's unwavering belief in her gave her a new sense of clarity. Maybe she didn't have all the answers right now, but she wasn't in this alone. She had a team, and she had the support of people who believed in her, starting with her family. The next morning, Emma arrived at Tesla's headquarters earlier than usual. She didn't sleep much, but something had shifted in her mind. She wasn't going to give up, not without exploring every possible avenue. If her invention couldn't scale in the way they'd originally planned, maybe there was another path forward. She walked into Elon's office, where he was discussing something with his senior engineers. "Elon, I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady but determined. "Maybe we need to rethink the way we're approaching the scalability issue. What if instead of focusing on the cost of materials, we focus on increasing the efficiency of the carbon capture process even further? What if we can reduce the footprint of the entire system, making it smaller and more accessible to everyday people or smaller companies?" Elon looked up, a spark of interest in his eyes. "That's an interesting angle. We've been so focused on scaling it for large industries, we haven't considered the potential for decentralized use. Could we adapt this for home use, smaller businesses, or even vehicles?" Emma nodded. "Exactly. We've always imagined this on a massive scale, but maybe it's time to think smaller, more distributed. If we can make the carbon converter more accessible to individuals or small companies, we can still have a huge impact. It's just going to take a different kind of strategy." Elon smiled, his expression thoughtful. "You're onto something, Emma. Let's explore that. A more localized version of the carbon converter might be the answer to what we've been missing. It might also allow us to develop different pricing models that could make it more affordable." The new idea was a game changer. The team quickly shifted gears, working on a more portable version of the carbon converter that could be used in smaller applications. The idea of decentralizing the carbon capture process was revolutionary. It could mean carbon converters in homes, small factories, farms, and even in transportation. The new design focused on reducing the overall size and complexity of the system while still maintaining its core function. It was a massive challenge, but it was also an exciting opportunity to rethink everything they had worked on so far. As Emma watched the team dive into this new project, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were working together as never before, all focused on the same goal. They had hit a roadblock, but now they were charting a new course, one that was full of possibility. The weeks that followed the new direction were a blur of activity. Emma, Elon, and the team worked tirelessly to reimagine the carbon converter's design for smaller scale, decentralized use. The pace of innovation at Tesla was relentless, but Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer just trying to prove herself to the world. She was working on something that could truly make a difference. The pressure didn't seem as suffocating anymore. Instead, it felt like a challenge, one she was ready to tackle. The new carbon converter prototype was smaller, sleeker, and more efficient than anything they had previously tested. It could fit in the size of a large refrigerator, making it suitable for small businesses, homes, or even individual vehicles. However, the challenges they faced were now different. They had to make sure the smaller system was not only functional but cost-effective, and that it could operate in a variety of environments, from rural farms to city apartments. The team worked on refining the materials, lighter, cheaper, and more durable. Emma spent hours brainstorming with the engineers, working through different iterations and fine-tuning the carbon capture mechanism to ensure it could work in various real-world scenarios. They had to think beyond just capturing carbon. They needed to make sure the energy generated from the stored carbon could be released efficiently and used in multiple ways. But with every new version, Emma felt a growing sense of hope. They were on the brink of something. They could feel it. And, more importantly, they could see it. The new prototype was working in the lab. It was capturing carbon effectively, storing it safely, and releasing energy when needed. Still, doubts lingered. Would it work when exposed to the unpredictable variables of the real world? Would the smaller model be as efficient as they hoped? Or would it face the same scalability issues that had stalled the larger prototype? Elon saw Emma's growing concern. "Hey," he said one day, as they sat reviewing the data together, "you've done a great job. The progress we've made is huge. The new direction you suggested might just be the breakthrough we needed. Emma looked up, meeting his eyes. It's not enough yet, Elon. We're not there. Not yet. Elon smiled. You're right. We're not done, but we're much closer than we were. And you've been pushing all of us to think bigger, think differently. That's the kind of thinking that gets us to the finish line. Trust the process. His words, simple as they were, had a calming effect on her. He was right. They weren't finished yet, but they were on the right path. It wasn't the end, but it was a crucial turning point. While Emma and her team were deep in the weeds of technical adjustments, the pressure from the outside world didn't let up. The media attention, which had initially been a source of excitement, was now becoming a constant reminder of the stakes. Every new headline felt like a countdown, and every update from Tesla was met with rising expectations. In addition to the media, the political landscape was starting to get involved. Climate change legislation was being discussed at the federal level, and there was growing pressure for companies to take more aggressive actions towards sustainability. Tesla, with its high-profile involvement in the carbon converter project, was under intense scrutiny. Investors, too, were starting to weigh in. They were excited by the potential of Emma's invention, but they wanted results, and fast. One afternoon, Elon called Emma into his office. The tension in the air was palpable. She had been expecting this moment. She just didn't know what Elon was going to say. Emma, he began, I've been speaking with some key investors and industry leaders. They're impressed with the progress, but they want a timeline. A solid one. They're looking for us to deliver something concrete within the next few months. They want to know when we can scale this and roll it out on a global level. Emma's heart sank. Months? Elon, we're still in the testing phase. We've made progress, but we're not ready to go to market yet. I know, Elon said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. But they need something to believe in. The world is watching, Emma. The pressure is building, and we need to show them that we're not just making promises, we're delivering. We need to get a working prototype out there, something that can be tested in real-world environments. Emma felt the weight of the conversation. The pressure wasn't just coming from the media anymore. It was coming from investors, politicians, and the global public. They wanted results, and they wanted them now. I'll do whatever it takes, Emma said, trying to steady her nerves. But we can't rush this. We need to make sure it works. People are counting on us. I know, Elon replied, his tone softening. And I trust you. But we need to get there soon. It wasn't long before Emma's project became a key talking point in global discussions about climate change. World leaders were discussing carbon capture technologies, and the potential for Emma's invention to help mitigate climate change was being debated in think tanks and international summits. The spotlight was brighter than ever, and Emma felt it more than ever. The pressure intensified when Tesla was invited to showcase their progress at the upcoming United Nations Climate Change Conference. It was the perfect platform to reveal the scaled-down, decentralized carbon converter prototype, if they could make it work in time. This wasn't just another test. This was a public demonstration. The world would be watching. Emma was terrified of failing, but she also knew that this could be the moment that changed everything. Elon, ever the visionary, was confident. This is the moment we've been working for, Emma, he told her one day, as they prepared for the final round of testing. You've already changed the conversation. Now we just need to make sure the world sees how close we are to solving this. Let's make sure we show them something they won't forget. As the day of the UN conference drew closer, the team worked non-stop to perfect the prototype. Emma spent sleepless nights running simulations, reviewing data, and making last-minute adjustments. Every part of her was consumed with ensuring that this time, this final test, it would work. And then, 1 week before the conference, the moment of truth came. The new prototype was ready for a full, real-world test. Tesla arranged for a demonstration in a rural area, where the carbon converter would be put through its paces. The team arrived early, setting up the equipment under the watchful eyes of the press, local officials, and environmentalists. Emma stood at the front of the crowd, heart in her throat, as the machine powered up. The sound of the converter humming to life was almost deafening in the quiet morning air. For a few seconds, the machine did nothing. Then the carbon capture mechanism kicked in, absorbing CO2 from the surrounding atmosphere. The screens around the demonstration area lit up with real-time data. And then it worked. The machine was capturing carbon at an unprecedented rate, storing it efficiently, and releasing energy that powered small devices set up around the field. The crowd erupted in applause as the team celebrated their success. For Emma, it felt surreal. The machine that had once been just an idea in her notebook was now real. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. It was a game changer. The United Nations Climate Change Conference was just days away, and Emma was more nervous than she'd ever been in her life. The excitement of the successful real-world test had hardly sunk in before the pressure of presenting at the conference took over. This wasn't just another prototype demo. It was her moment, the moment that could potentially change the world. The eyes of the entire global community would be on her and the Tesla team, eagerly waiting to see if her invention could truly help solve the climate crisis. The countdown had begun. Emma, Elon, and the team were already in New York, finalizing preparations for the big event. The night before the conference, they sat together in a meeting room at the conference center, surrounded by journalists and representatives from major environmental organizations. Elon stood at the head of the table, his usual confidence unshaken. "This is it," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "We've worked for months, and now we're ready. Tomorrow, we show the world what we've been working on." Emma's palms were sweating. She wasn't sure if she could go through with it. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of world leaders, climate experts, and media personalities was terrifying. She could already imagine the questions, the doubts, the skepticism. "What if it doesn't work?" she whispered to herself, barely audible. Elon caught her eye and gave her a reassuring smile. "It will work, Emma. You've made sure of that. This technology is the future. Now, it's time to show the world." Emma nodded, though a small part of her still felt unsure. But as she looked around the room, seeing the unwavering faith in her team, in Elon, in herself, she knew they had done everything they could. It was time to take the leap. The morning of the UN conference was a blur. After arriving at the venue, Emma and the team were ushered into the main hall, where rows of seats were filled with dignitaries, scientists, journalists, and activists. A palpable sense of anticipation hung in the air. Emma's heart raced as they approached the stage where the Tesla team was set to present their breakthrough technology. Emma's mind kept drifting back to the image of the working prototype. The way it had hummed to life, absorbed carbon, and produced energy. If it worked in front of such an esteemed audience, there would be no going back. It would be proof that innovation, no matter how improbable, could truly change the world. Elon stood next to her, watching the crowd. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. "I think so," Emma replied, though she felt a storm of nerves inside. "Don't think. Just show them what we've got," Elon said with a wink. And just like that, the signal was given, and the team walked to the stage. Emma stepped up to the podium, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath and scanned the audience. The faces of world leaders, scientists, and activists were all turned toward her, waiting. Her voice shook slightly at first, but then she found her rhythm. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. My name is Emma, and I'm here today to show you something that could change everything about how we fight climate change. It's not just an idea anymore. It's real. It's working." She motioned to the side of the stage where the prototype sat, waiting to be revealed. A hushed silence fell over the crowd as Emma pressed a button on the podium, signaling the machine to power up. The carbon converter began to hum as it came to life, its sleek, compact design gleaming under the bright lights. Emma explained how the technology worked, detailing how it captured CO2 from the atmosphere, stored it, and released clean energy. She went into the specifics of how the team had reimagined the converter to make it scalable, affordable, and accessible for everyday use, from homes to small businesses to individual vehicles. "As you can see," Emma continued, "we've taken the technology and scaled it down for a more localized, decentralized application. This isn't just a machine for corporations or big industries. It's a solution for everyone, whether you're an individual looking to reduce your carbon footprint or a business trying to reduce its emissions." Emma demonstrated how the converter could power small devices connected to it. As the data poured in on the large screen behind her, she could feel the room hanging on every word. The machine was working flawlessly. The carbon was being captured, stored, and converted into usable energy. For a moment, Emma let herself believe, just for a moment, that everything was going to be okay. The machine was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. The crowd erupted into applause as the demonstration concluded. Journalists quickly began taking notes, while environmental experts whispered excitedly to each other. The room was filled with energy, with people clearly impressed by what they had just witnessed. But amidst the applause, Emma's eyes were trained on the panel of international leaders sitting in the front row. Their faces were unreadable, giving nothing away. A few moments later, the first question came. A climate scientist, his voice serious but respectful, spoke up. "This is an impressive technology, no doubt. But what makes this scalable? How do you plan to ensure that this carbon converter can be produced in mass quantities at an affordable price?" Emma had expected questions like this. She had thought long and hard about the challenges they faced. "That's exactly what we're working on," she responded. "We've already made strides in reducing the cost of the materials and improving the efficiency of the converter. The next step is to ramp up production. With the right partnerships and investment, we believe this can be rolled out to communities around the world. We're already in talks with companies that could help bring this to market." Another hand shot up from the crowd. "What about the environmental impact of producing these machines themselves? Isn't that just another layer of emissions we'll have to account for?" Emma took a deep breath before responding, recalling her discussions with Elon about this very question. "Yes, of course, we're mindful of the environmental impact of production. That's why we've worked hard to ensure that the materials used in the carbon converter are not only efficient but also sustainable. The goal is to make this a net positive technology, where the carbon saved by using the converter far outweighs the emissions created in the manufacturing process. This is just one part of a larger, ongoing effort to create a sustainable future." The questions kept coming, each one probing deeper into the feasibility of the technology. Emma answered every one with confidence, though inside, her mind raced. This was the moment she had prepared for, the moment she could prove that the work wasn't just a dream. She had to convince the world that this was real, and that it could actually make a difference. The last question came from a UN delegate, whose face was familiar from news reports. "Emma, this is incredibly impressive. But the world has seen many miracle solutions to climate change in the past. What makes this different? Why should we believe this is the real deal?" Emma paused, her heart pounding. This was the hardest question yet, the one that could determine whether the carbon converter would become a global game-changer, or just another failed attempt. She looked at the audience, her mind going back to the countless nights she had spent working on this, to the failures and the breakthroughs, to the millions of people who were counting on a real solution. Then, she spoke. "Because it's real," Emma said, her voice steady. "We've already built it. We've tested it. It works. And with the right support, we can scale it. This isn't just another miracle solution. It's a solution that's already working, and we have the proof." The room fell silent. Then, slowly, the applause started again, this time louder and more genuine. The crowd wasn't just clapping for the technology. They were clapping for the promise of a future that was finally within reach. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The applause at the UN Climate Change Conference echoed in Emma's ears long after she left the stage. For a brief moment, it had felt like she was floating, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. The questions, the pressure, the doubts, it had all been worth it. The room had believed in her and her invention. The world had seen the potential of the carbon converter. But as the conference ended and the reporters surged toward her, Emma knew that this was only the beginning. The real work was just starting. The moment they stepped off the stage, Emma was bombarded by a swarm of journalists. Microphones were thrust in her face, cameras flashed from every direction, and the questions kept coming faster than she could answer. "Emma, how soon can we see this technology available to the public?" a reporter asked. "Do you have any plans for large-scale production?" another shouted. "What do you say to critics who claim this is just another pipe dream?" The questions were relentless, but Emma handled them with poise. She spoke about the next steps, partnering with manufacturers, ramping up production, and addressing concerns about scaling. She spoke about the hope she felt, about the importance of this moment in history. The pressure of the spotlight was palpable, but Emma had faced worse before. And today, she had the proof to back up her words. After the press conference, Elon found her backstage, grinning ear to ear. "Well done," he said, offering a handshake. "I knew you'd crush it." Emma smiled, though her exhaustion was starting to settle in. "I don't know if I crushed it, but I think we got the message across." "We did. This is going to be huge," Elon said. "Now, it's time to make it happen." The days following the conference were a whirlwind of offers, phone calls, and emails. Emma's inbox flooded with messages from governments, corporations, investors, and scientists from all over the world. Everyone wanted to be a part of it. Governments were offering incentives, tax breaks, and funding to help roll out the technology globally. Environmental organizations hailed the project as a turning point in the fight against climate change. The media coverage was overwhelming. Emma's name was trending on every platform, and news outlets hailed her as a hero of the climate movement. But despite the overwhelming praise, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She had worked so hard to get here, but now that the world was paying attention, the pressure was more intense than ever. She couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not when so many people were putting their faith in her and the technology. At a meeting with Elon and the Tesla board, Emma's thoughts began to shift. They had the resources, the funding, the expertise. But they also had critics, loud voices that questioned whether any technology, no matter how innovative, could be scaled up in time to make a real impact on the climate crisis. People were already asking when the technology would be available for mass production, and Emma knew that they had to move quickly. "This is where the real work begins," Elon said during the meeting. "We've got the momentum. Now we need to scale fast. We've got a window of opportunity before other companies and governments start rushing in with their own solutions." Emma nodded. "I agree. We've got to make sure we can manufacture at a large scale, and we need to ensure the cost is manageable. Otherwise, this will just remain a novelty for the rich. We're already working on a plan to bring in more partners and investors. We've got major manufacturers who are interested," Elon continued. "But we need to move faster. The world needs this technology, and we've got the chance to be the ones to deliver it." As the days wore on, Emma found herself increasingly isolated. She spent long hours in the lab, poring over data and fine-tuning the prototype. Her personal life, once filled with moments of relaxation and reflection, had all but disappeared. There was no time for anything other than work. She hadn't spoken to her family much since the conference. Her mother had called several times, but Emma had been so consumed with the project that she hadn't found the time to sit down and have a proper conversation. One night, as she sat alone in her apartment, staring at the blueprint of the next-generation carbon converter, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her mom. "Emma, I know how busy you are, but don't forget to take care of yourself. You're doing amazing things, but I miss you." Emma read the message several times. She hadn't realized how much she had distanced herself from everything outside the project. She missed her mom too, and she missed the simple things. Sitting on the porch with her family, eating dinner without worrying about the next deadline. But there was no time for that. The world was waiting for her to deliver, and the pressure was mounting with every passing day. It wasn't just Emma who was feeling the strain. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure on the Tesla team was becoming unbearable. The excitement from the conference had propelled them forward, but now there were constant meetings, conference calls, and deadlines that loomed large. The team had to figure out how to refine the prototype, manage logistics, and develop a strategy for large-scale production, all while staying ahead of the competition. Emma noticed the growing tension within the team. Engineers were frustrated with the pace of progress. Scientists were worried about the long-term impacts of scaling the technology too quickly, and investors were pushing for quicker results. One evening, after a particularly heated meeting, Emma and Elon found themselves walking down the hall of Tesla's headquarters, trying to decompress. "Do you ever feel like we're in over our heads?" Emma asked, looking at the floor. Elon paused for a moment, considering the question. "Every day," he admitted. "But that's part of what makes it exciting. We've always been in over our heads. If we weren't, we wouldn't be changing the world." The only way to make a difference is to dive into the unknown. Emma smiled, appreciating his perspective, but a part of her still wondered if they were trying to do too much, too fast. The world was counting on them, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the more people they brought in, the more pressure they had to deliver. Just when Emma thought things couldn't get more intense, a major setback hit. During a routine test of the next-generation carbon converter, a technical failure occurred. The system failed to capture carbon at the expected rate, and a safety valve malfunctioned, causing the prototype to overheat. No one was injured, but the damage to the equipment was severe. Emma was devastated. The prototype they had worked so hard to perfect was damaged, and they would have to go back to the drawing board. "I don't understand how this happened," Emma said, pacing in the testing facility. "We double-checked everything. This shouldn't have happened." Elon stood beside her, his face grim. "It's a setback, but it's not the end. We've had setbacks before. What matters is how we handle it. Let's figure out what went wrong and fix it." Despite his calm demeanor, Emma could see the weight of the situation in his eyes. The world was watching, and if they didn't deliver soon, all the promises they had made could start to crumble. The days following the carbon converter prototype failure were the hardest Emma had faced in this entire journey. It felt like everything they had worked for, every sleepless night and countless hours of testing, had just come crashing down. The media had picked up on the failure quickly, casting doubts over the viability of the technology. Journalists were speculating whether Emma's breakthrough was truly ready for mass production, or if it had been too much too soon. Elon had called an emergency meeting with the Tesla team to address the situation. The room was tense as everyone took their seats, the weight of the failure heavy on all their shoulders. Emma's heart sank as she walked into the conference room. She knew the stakes were higher than ever, but it felt as if they were on the brink of losing everything. "All right," Elon said, his voice sharp and commanding. "Let's break this down. What went wrong, and how do we fix it?" Emma took a deep breath before speaking. The overheating was caused by an error in the system's power regulation. It was supposed to divert excess energy, but the safety valve malfunctioned and caused the shutdown. "The problem seems to be a software issue, not a hardware one." A few engineers nodded, furiously taking notes. Emma continued, "We need to reassess the system's power grid integration and overhaul the software algorithms to ensure the energy balance is maintained." Elon turned to the engineers. "You've got your marching orders. We need a fix fast. We've got no time to waste." "Emma, how long do you think it will take to get the system up and running again?" Emma hesitated, her mind racing through the calculations. "Given the complexity of the issue, I'd say at least a week to resolve the software glitch. After that, we'll need to run a full battery of tests to ensure it's stable." Elon nodded, his expression unreadable. "We'll make it work. This is a setback, not the end." The team seemed to accept Elon's words, but Emma couldn't shake the gnawing doubt in her stomach. A week could feel like an eternity in a world that was already skeptical. And if they didn't get it right, the public outcry would be deafening. For the next few days, Emma and her team were buried in their work, glued to their computers, code, and testing equipment. Emma barely had time to eat or sleep, consumed by the need to fix the prototype. She could feel the eyes of the world on her. Each time her phone buzzed, she feared it was another negative news story or a frustrated investor demanding results. It wasn't just the tech community that was watching. Everyday people were starting to invest their hopes in the technology. Emma had received hundreds of messages, from environmental activists thanking her, to concerned citizens asking when they could install the carbon converters in their homes. They had all bought into the promise of a cleaner, greener future, and Emma wasn't about to let them down. But the pressure was wearing her down. The long nights in the lab, the endless meetings with engineers, the constant calls and emails from investors, and the unrelenting media scrutiny, it was starting to take a toll. She felt like she was drowning in expectations, and for the first time in a long while, she questioned whether she could truly pull it off. One evening, after another grueling day of testing, Emma sat alone in the lab, staring at the malfunctioning prototype. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she couldn't seem to focus. Just as she was about to give up for the night, she heard footsteps behind her. It was Elon. "You okay?" he asked quietly, leaning against the doorframe. Emma turned and smiled weakly. "I don't know, Elon. I just feel like we're running out of time. What if this doesn't work? What if we've gotten too far ahead of ourselves? Elon stepped into the room and sat across from her, his usual confidence tempered by something softer. I get it. The weight of the world is on your shoulders, and I know it feels like the pressure is unbearable. But remember why we started this. It wasn't just to make a breakthrough in technology. It was to change the world, to make a real, tangible difference. Emma looked up at him, the exhaustion in her eyes reflected in his. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can. You've already fixed so much already, Elon said, his voice steady and calm. You've pushed this further than anyone thought possible. Don't let a single setback define you. We're not in this alone. The team, Tesla, everyone. This is a collective effort. He stood up and placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll get through this. Together. You've got this, Emma. His words gave Emma a renewed sense of resolve. She wasn't alone in this. She had a team. She had Elon, and the world was counting on them to succeed. She couldn't afford to give up now. The following week was intense. The engineers worked around the clock to fix the software issue, and Emma spent every available minute testing and refining the carbon converter. The setback had taught them valuable lessons about the vulnerabilities in their initial design. Every failure had led to improvements, and with each new version of the prototype, they were getting closer to perfection. Then, one fateful night, after days of work, the system finally clicked. The safety valve functioned properly, the energy regulation was flawless, and the prototype powered up without any issues. Emma watched in disbelief as the carbon converter hummed to life, more efficiently than before. We did it, she whispered to herself, a wave of relief washing over her. Elon arrived in the lab shortly after, just in time to see the test results. He looked at Emma, a proud smile spreading across his face. I knew you had it in you. Emma couldn't help but smile back. The feeling of overcoming the challenge was overwhelming. They had done it, but the hardest part was still ahead. Now that they had the technology working at scale, the real challenge was implementing it worldwide. The next day, Emma, Elon, and the Tesla team stood before the media again, ready to make a major announcement. This time, it wasn't a demonstration of the technology, it was a promise. The carbon converter had passed all tests, and they were ready to begin mass production. The next phase of their journey would be focused on scaling up and getting the technology to the people who needed it most. Emma took the podium, feeling a sense of quiet triumph. The world had doubted them, but now they had the proof to back up their claims. Today, we are proud to announce that the carbon converter is ready for the next step, Emma said, her voice steady and confident. We are beginning mass production and working with governments, businesses, and communities around the world to make this technology available. It's time for real change, and we're here to lead the way. The press conference was met with a standing ovation, and once again, the world was watching. But this time, Emma wasn't afraid. She had taken the risks, faced the doubts, and persevered. The journey wasn't over, but they had taken a major step forward. The fight against climate change was far from won, but they had proven that innovation and determination could make a difference. With the announcement of the carbon converter's readiness for mass production, the world's attention was once again squarely focused on Emma and her groundbreaking technology. News outlets, social media platforms, and climate activists all hailed the development as a monumental step toward addressing the global climate crisis. The questions had shifted from, can this work? To, when can we get our hands on it? And how fast can this be scaled? But with the spotlight came a new set of challenges, difficulties that had been waiting in the wings, invisible behind the glossy headlines and promises of a greener future. As the world celebrated, Emma found herself navigating a new landscape, one fraught with obstacles that she had never anticipated. The first major hurdle that reared its head was the economic aspect of scaling up. Emma, Elon, and the Tesla team had been aware of the financial demands of mass production, but they hadn't quite understood how much harder it would be than they had imagined. Despite the media frenzy and promises of partnership from governments, the reality of manufacturing the carbon converter at the scale needed to make a real impact was daunting. The raw materials required were expensive, and setting up large-scale production lines to assemble and distribute the technology worldwide demanded a level of investment that Elon's fortune could only partly cover. At a meeting with the Tesla board, Emma could see the tension on everyone's face. "We're going to need more funding," Elon said, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "This isn't just about making the technology available. It's about making it affordable and accessible." Emma agreed, but the numbers were staggering. "The cost of production is higher than we anticipated," she explained. "We'll need to negotiate bulk supply contracts with mining companies for the raw materials, as well as negotiate with governments to secure subsidies that can help offset the costs." "Have you considered corporate sponsorships or private investors?" one board member asked. Emma shook her head. "At this scale, we'll need more than that. We'll need to create a sustainable, long-term financial plan. This isn't just a one-off invention, it's a new industry." Elon leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "We've always said this is a marathon, not a sprint. Let's talk to our partners, figure out the best strategy, and keep pushing forward." Emma appreciated Elon's unyielding optimism, but the road ahead was far from easy. Every step was a battle, getting the supply chain right, negotiating deals with countries, and keeping the costs down to make the technology available to both developed and developing nations. Even as Emma and the team were trying to secure the necessary funding and resources, they were faced with new criticism. As the project scaled, the first cracks in the narrative began to show. Not everyone was thrilled about the technology. Environmental groups, who had initially praised the carbon converter, began to voice concerns about the long-term impacts of manufacturing at such a large scale. They worried about the environmental cost of producing the converters themselves, especially in countries where the production processes relied on fossil fuels. Some believed that the focus should be on reducing emissions, not creating a new market for technology. Others, especially in the corporate world, saw Emma's breakthrough as a direct threat to their business models. Energy companies and coal industry lobbyists began to push back, questioning the efficiency of the carbon converter and calling for more regulation. Some even went so far as to plant rumors that the technology was too good to be true, spreading misinformation and skepticism. "Isn't it just a band-aid for a much bigger issue?" one high-profile critic asked on a popular news program. "We can't just rely on technology to fix what decades of pollution have done to our planet. The real solution lies in changing consumption patterns, not creating another gadget." These voices were loud, and their criticisms were growing more influential by the day. It didn't help that some governments, while publicly supportive, were dragging their feet on policies to integrate the carbon converter into national infrastructures. For Emma, it felt like the very foundations of the movement she had worked so hard to build were beginning to shake. In the midst of the growing opposition, Emma found herself at a crossroads. The pressure from investors, governments, and the media to deliver had intensified, but so had the pressure from environmental groups and activists who questioned whether her technology was a genuine solution or merely a quick fix. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that no matter how much progress they made, there would always be someone questioning the efficacy of their work. She spent long hours pondering the issue. Was the carbon converter just another technology that helped mask the deeper problems of overconsumption and unsustainable practices? Could she truly make a difference with a piece of machinery? Or was this just a stopgap until the real changes were made? One evening, she sat on her balcony, staring out at the city lights, feeling a sense of uncertainty she hadn't felt in years. She was about to make one of the biggest decisions of her life, and she wasn't sure what the right choice was. It was at that moment that she received a call from her mother. "Emma, how are you holding up?" Her mother's voice was soft, concerned. Emma let out a deep sigh. "It's hard, Mom. It feels like no matter what I do, someone's always going to be disappointed. I've given everything to this project, but now it feels like I'm not doing enough." Her mother paused before responding. "I can't pretend to know exactly what you're going through, but I do know this. You've already changed the world, Emma. One small step at a time. This technology might not solve everything, but it's a piece of the puzzle. And you're not doing it alone." The words hit Emma harder than she expected. Her mom was right. It wasn't just about one invention or one person's vision. The carbon converter was part of a bigger movement, and while it wasn't a perfect solution, it was a step forward. "I've been so caught up in trying to fix everything at once," Emma said, her voice shaking. "I've forgotten why I started this in the first place." "You started because you believed in making a difference. And you have. Remember that," her mom said gently. After that conversation, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that the pressure to be perfect, to solve the entire climate crisis with one invention, was never going to work. Instead, she focused on the core message. Change was possible. And even if the carbon converter wasn't the entire answer, it was a tool in a larger toolkit. She re-engaged with her team, emphasizing that their mission wasn't just about beating the critics or scaling quickly. It was about making a tangible, positive difference, no matter how incremental. She urged them to push forward, not just for the success of the carbon converter, but for the greater vision of a more sustainable world. We don't have all the answers, Emma told the team, but we have something that works. And that's enough to start. Elon's faith in her and the technology remained unwavering. Together, they restructured their approach to the project, slowing down the rush to mass production and ensuring the environmental sustainability of the manufacturing process. They also began working closely with governments and NGOs to create comprehensive policies that would help integrate the carbon converter into existing infrastructures. The decision to slow down and reassess their strategy had given Emma and her team the breathing room they needed. In the months following the critical decision to refine the carbon converter's production and integrate it into global infrastructure more thoughtfully, they had transformed the approach to scaling. The energy surrounding the project was still electric, but now it was carefully harnessed. Emma was no longer chasing headlines. Instead, she was setting the stage for a lasting revolution. Months of refining, testing, and planning culminated in a single, defining moment: the global launch of the carbon converter. The event was to be held in New York, where a carefully selected crowd of influential leaders, scientists, business executives, and policymakers would be present. Emma stood at the center of the action, nervous but resolute, ready to unveil the next phase of the project. The venue was packed with people who had waited for this moment. It wasn't just about the product anymore. It was about the world watching. Could they truly make the transition from prototype to global implementation? Would Emma's vision for a cleaner future be embraced, or would it be written off as another lofty dream? As Emma stood backstage, Elon appeared beside her, offering her an encouraging smile. "You've done the hard work, Emma. This is just the world catching up to you," Elon said with his signature confidence. Emma smiled back, though her nerves still tingled in her chest. "Thanks, Elon. It feels like we're standing at the edge of something big. What if the world isn't ready for it?" Elon gave her a reassuring look. "The world is never ready for change. We make it happen. We've been here before." The event was broadcast live to millions of people around the world. Emma, dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, took the stage amidst a sea of applause. She could feel the weight of the world's gaze on her, but it wasn't the pressure she felt when the technology had first failed. It was a sense of purpose, a resolve to make the moment count. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice calm yet filled with an underlying strength. "Today, we stand at a pivotal moment in history. The challenge of climate change has been ignored, minimized, and too often dismissed. But we cannot afford to ignore it any longer. The time for action is now. The carbon converter is not just a piece of technology. It is a symbol of what's possible when we all come together to fight for the future of our planet." The crowd was captivated as she continued, explaining the technology's potential to drastically reduce carbon emissions and its scalability for use in industries worldwide. She spoke about the challenges the project had faced, how they had listened to the concerns of critics, and how they had adjusted the strategy to ensure the technology would be produced responsibly. "Tonight, we are launching the first wave of the carbon converter to select countries, industries, and communities that need it most," Emma announced. "This is just the beginning. Together, we will continue to innovate, improve, and push forward. Because change isn't just about creating technology, it's about creating a movement that empowers us all." The applause that followed was deafening. Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she truly believed that this moment, this technology, and this movement could change the world. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a silver bullet, but it was something real. In the days and weeks following the launch, the response from the world was overwhelming. Governments began to make commitments to incorporate the carbon converter into national climate action plans. Businesses that had previously been wary of the technology began negotiating contracts for mass production and installation. And most importantly, people, the ordinary citizens who had been following the journey, embraced it with open arms. The first cities to adopt the carbon converter technology were some of the largest urban areas in the world, including New York, Paris, and Tokyo. In these cities, large-scale installations were made, and the results were immediately noticeable. Air quality improved, and emissions began to decrease at a measurable rate. The technology was working, and the proof was undeniable. Change is happening, and it's happening fast, Emma said in a follow-up interview with a major news outlet. We are witnessing a shift, a transformation in how we approach our planet's future. This is about more than just a cleaner world. It's about creating a sustainable future for generations to come. But even as the world cheered, challenges continued to arise. Some nations were slow to adopt the new technology, citing the costs involved. Others argued that without coordinated global policies to reduce emissions at the root, the carbon converter was just a temporary fix. Emma knew this wasn't the end of the journey. It was only the beginning. As the technology was implemented in various regions, Emma and Elon faced a new set of challenges. They had to ensure that the global supply chain was sustainable and scalable. They had to balance the speed of production with the ecological footprint of manufacturing the converters themselves. And they needed to continue engaging with the world's governments to build the necessary policies and incentives to make the transition to cleaner technologies a global priority. The next big hurdle would be integrating the carbon converter into industrial sectors, particularly heavy industries like manufacturing and transportation, which were responsible for a significant portion of global emissions. Emma and her team began working on specialized versions of the technology designed to handle the unique needs of these sectors. They also started collaborating with global environmental organizations, working hand in hand with them to ensure that the carbon converter was only one part of a larger, more holistic solution. The technology was a tool, not the answer, and Emma was determined to make sure that everyone understood that. As the carbon converter became more widely adopted, unexpected allies began to emerge. Some of the world's largest companies, traditionally seen as part of the problem in the fight against climate change, started reaching out to Emma and Elon. Companies in the oil, automotive, and manufacturing sectors that had once opposed large-scale environmental regulations began to see the potential in the carbon converter. One such company, a major oil conglomerate, approached Tesla with an offer to partner in large-scale installations. While Emma and Elon were cautious about the deal, they realized that the partnerships could help further spread the technology on a global scale. It was clear that there were still people and organizations that were driven more by profits than the planet's well-being. But Emma believed that even those organizations could be part of the solution, provided they were willing to shift their mindset. The world was changing, and Emma felt the ripple effects of their work every day. It was no longer just about the carbon converter. It was about rethinking how humanity approached its relationship with the environment. Governments, businesses, and individuals began to see sustainability not just as a necessity, but as an opportunity for innovation and growth. And as Emma looked out over the skyline of New York, the city where it all began, she realized something profound. This was just the start of a long journey. The real work was only beginning. The carbon converter was a milestone, but it wasn't the destination. Emma smiled to herself, ready for the next challenge. The world had spoken. Now it was time for everyone to act. With the global launch of the carbon converter gaining momentum, the world appeared to be on the verge of something transformative. However, Emma soon realized that a battle of a different nature was brewing behind the scenes. The corporate world, with all its ambitions and power struggles, began to reveal itself as an unpredictable force, ready to capitalize on the situation or fight it tooth and nail. The first signs of trouble came in the form of unexpected resistance. Emma had assumed that once the technology began to show real promise, the floodgates would open. Everyone from environmental organizations to progressive businesses would rally around it. But reality proved more complex. While there were many enthusiastic supporters, the entrenched corporate players, especially those in the oil, gas, and coal sectors, were far from welcoming. One morning, Emma received a call from Elon. His voice was tense, a rare occurrence. "We've got a problem," Elon said, skipping the pleasantries. "Big oil is moving in. They're starting to spin a narrative about how the carbon converter is just a distraction. They're pushing for more regulations on carbon capture that would put a chokehold on our technology. Emma frowned, her stomach sinking. The influence of oil giants was vast, and if they started lobbying against the technology, it could delay the progress they had made. Are they going after governments, or is this just a PR campaign? Both, Elon replied. I've already heard about behind-the-scenes efforts to discredit the converter, some even questioning its scientific validity. We need to keep our eyes open. They'll fight this like they fought electric vehicles. Emma thought for a moment. If we want this to work, we need more than just technology. We need allies in governments and public support. If we lose the narrative, we might lose everything. She immediately got to work, gathering data, talking to key influencers in the political and environmental spheres, and preparing a counter-narrative. The fight wasn't just about the technology. It was about controlling the story. As the carbon converter became more widespread, governments across the globe began making moves. Some were quick to embrace the technology, incorporating it into national climate plans. Others, however, began to hesitate. These were the governments with deep ties to fossil fuel industries, places where political pressure from big corporations still held sway. Emma found herself in frequent conversations with key policymakers, pushing them to fast-track legislation that would integrate the carbon converter into existing environmental policies. She also worked with international organizations like the United Nations, aiming to create a global framework for carbon emissions that recognize the technology as a critical tool in combating climate change. But not all political leaders were willing to commit to the change. Emma soon received reports that a major climate summit in Europe, where global leaders were meant to discuss new environmental regulations, had become a battleground between progressive politicians and those funded by fossil fuel interests. In the days leading up to the summit, Emma and her team were locked in a whirlwind of meetings and negotiations. It felt as though she was fighting not only for the carbon converter's survival, but also for the very idea of progress itself. As the pressure mounted, Emma began to feel the weight of leadership in a way she never had before. The constant battle with political forces, the need to respond to misinformation campaigns, and the daily strain of making high-stakes decisions wore on her. She had always believed in the importance of her work, but as she stood on the edge of a global transformation, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away from her grasp. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of back-to-back meetings, Emma walked alone through the Tesla campus, lost in thought. The night air was cool and crisp, but her mind was heavy. She stopped at a bench near the solar farm, staring out at the rows of solar panels bathed in soft light. "What if we're not enough?" she whispered to herself. "What if the world isn't ready for all this change?" Her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. She turned to find Elon standing behind her, his face serious but calm. "You're wondering if it's all worth it," he said, sitting beside her. "I can see it on your face. I've been there. We've all been there." Emma sighed. "There's so much at stake. It feels like every day it gets harder. The opposition is growing stronger, and I'm afraid we're losing the fight before we even finish the race." Elon nodded. "It's never easy, but here's what I've learned. There will always be resistance, always be forces trying to pull us back into the past. But you've already done something incredible. You've built something that works. It's not just about the technology, it's about the movement you've created." Emma looked out at the horizon, feeling a quiet sense of determination stirring within her. "You're right. This isn't just a product. It's a new way of thinking about the world. And I'm not backing down." Elon smiled, his eyes gleaming. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Just when Emma was starting to lose hope, an unexpected development brought a fresh wave of optimism. Several influential environmental organizations, who had been skeptical about the carbon converter's impact, came forward with public endorsements. They recognized that while the converter wasn't a complete solution, it was an essential tool in the fight against climate change. These endorsements were a game-changer. They gave Emma and Elon the credibility they needed to rally more governments to their cause. With renewed energy, they focused on building new partnerships and securing investments from organizations that saw the potential in the technology's long-term benefits. Emma's reputation as a leader who could unite disparate factions, from environmentalists to corporations, began to solidify. She received an invitation to speak at the upcoming European Climate Summit, a significant opportunity to address global leaders and push for international cooperation. The day of the summit arrived, and Emma was nervous but focused. She had spent weeks preparing her speech, refining her message, and strategizing with her team. The room was filled with diplomats, industry leaders, and scientists from all over the world. The pressure was immense, but Emma knew that this moment could change everything. As she took the stage, the room fell silent. Emma stood tall, her eyes scanning the audience. She took a deep breath and began. "Today, we face a choice," Emma said, her voice steady but powerful. "We can continue down the path of inaction, where future generations will suffer the consequences of our neglect. Or we can choose a future that is sustainable, equitable, and thriving. The carbon converter is a tool, a step in the right direction, but it's not the end of the journey. It's a beginning." The room listened intently as Emma outlined the importance of both technological innovation and policy reform. She called on global leaders to unite behind solutions that embraced new technologies like the carbon converter while also addressing the root causes of climate change: unsustainable consumption, deforestation, and pollution. "I believe we can do this," she finished. "We must not only believe it but act on it. The time for change is now." The applause was immediate, and it was loud. Emma knew they weren't just applauding the carbon converter. They were applauding the vision she had shared. The summit ended with a historic agreement. Several major countries committed to incorporating the carbon converter into their climate plans and promised to work with Elon and Emma's team to scale the technology even further. The political tides had begun to shift. As the carbon converter technology surged forward, riding on the momentum of the global summit and a newly energized political landscape, Emma found herself facing a different set of challenges. The demand for the technology skyrocketed, and with it came a host of unexpected problems, particularly in the supply chain. What had seemed like a smooth path to large-scale production was quickly revealed to be much more complicated than anyone had anticipated. It started small: delays in shipments, backlogs in materials, and slight production hiccups. Emma didn't think much of it at first. After all, scaling a technology of this magnitude wasn't going to be smooth. But then the issues began to compound. Within a few weeks, parts were in short supply, the factories producing key components were struggling to meet the demand, and even more troubling, the cost of materials began to rise dramatically. Elon's team had already been working overtime to increase Tesla's manufacturing capacity, but this was different. The carbon converter relied on several rare materials that were difficult to source, and global supply chains for these materials had already been fragile long before Emma's technology began to take off. Emma sat in her office, staring at the stack of reports on her desk. Her fingers ran across the papers, scanning numbers and forecasts, but nothing made sense. The cost of raw materials for the carbon converters had increased by more than 40% in the last 2 months. Some of the essential components, especially the specialized filters needed to process carbon at the scale they required, were running out. The news of supply chain shortages spread quickly, and what was once an optimistic outlook now felt like an impending crisis. Her phone buzzed. It was Elon. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "The suppliers for the filtration material are falling behind. They've been hit with their own delays, and now we've got a bottleneck. The converters won't be able to meet demand unless we figure this out fast." Emma leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The implications were massive. If they didn't fix this, entire regions would be left without access to the technology they had promised. There was also the very real threat of growing criticism from the media and political leaders who had put their trust in the project. If the supply chain couldn't keep up, it could undermine all their hard work. "We need to find a way to scale faster," Emma said, trying to think of solutions. "Is there anyone else we can work with? Any backup suppliers?" Elon was quiet for a moment. "There are, but they're all backed up too. It's going to take months to reroute supplies from new partners. In the meantime, we might have to start prioritizing installations. First come, first serve." Emma didn't like the idea of leaving certain countries or cities without access to the technology, especially after the global excitement and commitments made at the summit. She knew that she had to act quickly and decisively. As Emma and Elon worked with their teams to address the supply chain issues, The ethical implications of their choices began to weigh heavily on Emma's mind. She knew that they were at a crossroads, not just in terms of production, but in how they handled the global demand. With limited materials, who should get the technology first? Should they prioritize the most developed nations that could pay top dollar? Or should they honor the commitments they made to underdeveloped nations, where the carbon converter could have the most immediate, life-saving impact? The dilemma was daunting. Emma spent sleepless nights wrestling with the decision. She couldn't afford to alienate anyone. Too many people had already invested in the vision she had promised. But how could she ensure fairness while still maintaining the momentum they had worked so hard to build? As weeks passed and the pressure continued to mount, Emma found an unlikely solution. One of her engineers, a quiet but brilliant scientist named Dr. Luis Martinez, approached her with a new concept. He had been working on a smaller, more affordable version of the carbon converter, one that could be produced with fewer resources and adapted to use alternative materials. "Emma," he said one afternoon in her office, his eyes alight with excitement, "I think I've cracked it. We can build a version of the converter using a different set of materials, ones that aren't in such high demand. It won't be as powerful as the full-scale version, but it can still make a significant impact, especially in places where carbon levels are the highest." Emma raised an eyebrow. "How much of a difference are we talking about here?" Luis smiled. "It's not a perfect solution, but it could help us bridge the gap. We could scale this new version quickly and use it as an interim measure in countries and regions that need it most. It's not ideal, but it's a hell of a lot better than waiting months for the full-scale units." Emma sat back in her chair, letting the idea sink in. She had always known that flexibility would be key to this mission. If they could find a way to meet immediate needs with a more adaptable version of the technology, they might just be able to keep their promises to the world. "Let's move on it," Emma said, feeling a rush of determination. "We'll make it work. You get the prototype ready, and I'll start figuring out the logistics to distribute it." As Emma prepared for the next stage of production, she also knew that she couldn't hide the reality of the supply chain crisis from the public. Transparency was essential, especially with the scale of the promises they had made. In a live-streamed address to the public, Emma explained the situation honestly but optimistically. "The demand for the carbon converter has exceeded our wildest expectations. While this is an incredibly positive sign, it has also created a challenge in our supply chain. We are currently working to scale production to meet the global need. Unfortunately, this will take time. But I want to assure you that we are committed to getting the technology to those who need it most, as quickly as possible. In the meantime, we are introducing an alternative solution, a smaller, more adaptable version of the carbon converter that will help bridge the gap until full-scale production can be ramped up." The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Many were frustrated by the delays, but most appreciated Emma's transparency. The alternative version of the converter was a compromise, but it was a compromise they could live with. The most important thing was that progress was still happening, even if it wasn't as fast as they had hoped. As the global market began to adapt to the new timeline, something surprising happened. New partnerships began to form. Companies in the mining and renewable energy sectors, who had once viewed the carbon converter with skepticism, now saw an opportunity. With the scarcity of certain materials, they offered to help by providing new sources for raw materials and even assisting with the logistics of scaling production. These new partnerships weren't just about business. Many of these companies had begun to realize the urgency of climate change in ways they hadn't before. Emma and Elon worked closely with them, forging strategic alliances that would not only help solve the immediate supply chain issues, but also build a foundation for long-term cooperation. Despite the supply chain setbacks, the carbon converter continued to make a difference. The smaller version, while not as powerful as the original, still helped reduce emissions in key regions, and every new partnership and innovation brought them closer to their ultimate goal. Emma learned an important lesson during this time. Progress was not always linear, but persistence, adaptability, and collaboration could overcome even the most challenging obstacles. With the launch of the alternative carbon converter gaining traction and Emma's team scrambling to fulfill global demand, a new wave of resistance began to take shape. Not from the corporate giants, nor from the supply chain struggles that had previously dominated their worries, but from an unexpected and powerful source, the political establishment. As the world's attention turned toward the potential of the carbon converter, Some governments, especially in regions with deep ties to fossil fuel industries, began to push back. In the U.S., a coalition of conservative lawmakers and lobbyists started questioning the viability of the technology, accusing it of being too experimental and economically impractical. In other countries, political leaders with vested interests in oil and gas took to the media, criticizing the converter as a distraction from what they claimed were more realistic solutions to climate change. Emma had been prepared for some resistance from the established industries, but this was different. These were the voices of authority, the policymakers who could block legislation, withhold funding, and slow down the adoption of the technology on a global scale. She found herself in a new battle, not just for the technology, but for the narrative of climate action itself. A major moment came when Emma received an invitation to testify before a powerful U.S. Senate committee. The invitation had come on the heels of growing opposition, and the timing couldn't have been more critical. She could either go and defend the carbon converter and its global impact or risk allowing the debate to be controlled by those who had already made up their minds. Her team discussed the pros and cons at length. On one hand, a strong performance could silence critics and rally support in the U.S., a key player in the fight against climate change. On the other hand, it was a dangerous move. She would be facing a political battleground, where a single misstep could jeopardize everything they had worked for. Emma knew what she had to do. "I have to go," she said after a long pause. "The world is watching. This is our chance to make sure the technology doesn't get lost in the political games." The day of the Senate hearing arrived, and Emma felt a familiar weight settle over her chest. The hearing room was packed with lawmakers, lobbyists, and journalists. It was clear that the stakes had never been higher. She sat at the witness table, her palms sweating as she glanced at the opposing panel, a group of conservative senators and fossil fuel representatives who had made it their mission to challenge her technology. The questioning started predictably enough. One senator, Senator Greg Anderson from West Virginia, a longtime ally of coal industries, launched the first attack. "Ms. Davis, your technology may be a novel idea, but it's still untested on the scale you're claiming. There are no guarantees it will work, and the costs associated with scaling it are astronomical. Why should taxpayers invest in something that might fail?" he asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. Emma stood firm, meeting his gaze. "Senator, I'm not here to offer a quick fix. I'm here to present a solution that can be part of a broader global strategy to combat climate change. The carbon converter is not a magic bullet. It's one tool in a much-needed toolbox. It's already proven to work, and its potential to scale could change the way the world addresses carbon emissions." Anderson wasn't satisfied with that answer. "But you're proposing a massive overhaul of infrastructure at a time when many experts say the costs of such a transition would hurt our economy. What about the jobs? What about the industries that rely on fossil fuels?" Emma took a deep breath, recognizing the complexity of his argument. She responded, "Senator, we cannot afford to cling to old industries at the expense of the future. The transition to clean energy isn't optional, it's inevitable. The jobs of the future will be in industries like renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and clean tech. The question we need to ask is not whether we should make the change, but how we can make that change a win for every community involved." The room was silent for a moment. Emma could see the hesitation in some of the senators' eyes, but she knew this was just the beginning. The true challenge was getting them to understand that the technology wasn't just an environmental issue. It was a matter of economic and geopolitical stability. While Emma's testimony had certainly struck a chord with some, it also ignited a political firestorm. Media outlets in conservative regions blasted her for being an outsider pushing an unproven agenda, while lobby groups funded by fossil fuel companies launched full-scale campaigns to discredit her. "You can't trust a single person who believes technology like this will fix climate change," one pundit declared. "This is all part of the green energy agenda, and we've seen how those promises turn out." As the backlash grew, Emma faced increasing pressure from both the media and political leaders. Calls for investigations into the carbon converter's feasibility mounted, and in some regions, local governments began delaying or halting the rollout of the technology altogether. Behind the scenes, the situation grew more complex. Emma had always been a person of resolve, but now she felt the weight of the world bearing down on her. She called an emergency meeting with Elon and the leadership team. I'm not sure how much more of this we can take, Emma said, her voice strained. The more we push forward, the more we're attacked. It's not just corporate resistance anymore. It's politics, public opinion, and the media. They're making us out to be villains. Elon leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. We knew it wouldn't be easy. But this is the test. This is what happens when you disrupt a system that has been in place for generations. People will fight back because they fear losing control. But we can't let them dictate the future. Our job is to keep moving forward, no matter how much noise there is around us. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. You're right. But it's not just the opposition that's starting to hurt us. It's the uncertainty. We've got supporters backing away, unsure if we can deliver. If we don't act soon, the window to make a real difference could close. Elon nodded. Then let's stop worrying about the noise. Let's focus on what we can do. We're not just fighting for the carbon converter. We're fighting for a world that's healthier, more sustainable. The people who believe in that will stand with us. As the political landscape continued to shift beneath Emma's feet, a surprise ally emerged from the chaos. Dr. Jacqueline Turner, a prominent climate scientist and one of the leading advocates for carbon capture, reached out to Emma. Dr. Turner had been a vocal supporter of the technology from the beginning, but now, in the face of mounting opposition, she stepped forward in a new, bold way. I've been following your progress, Emma, Dr. Turner said during their call, and I've made the decision to speak out. I'm going to put my reputation on the line and publicly support your work. I've already spoken with a few influential colleagues, and we're forming a coalition of scientists and researchers who will back the carbon converter, no matter the political fallout. Emma felt a surge of gratitude. Jacqueline, this means more than you know. We're facing an uphill battle, and your voice will make all the difference. Dr. Turner smiled. The science is clear, Emma. The world can't afford to ignore what you've built. I'm in this for the long haul. In the weeks that followed, Emma and her team worked relentlessly to rebuild their public image. With Dr. Turner and other key scientists joining the fight, Emma found herself not only defending the carbon converter but rallying a community of experts and advocates who believed in the technology and its potential. Slowly, but surely, the tide began to turn. But Emma knew this was only the beginning. The battle for global climate action was far from over. With the political pushback mounting, the stakes were higher than ever. Emma had spent her entire life working toward this moment, and now, more than ever, she needed to stay the course, no matter the challenges ahead. The climate crisis was growing ever more urgent. Around the world, the consequences of inaction were becoming impossible to ignore. Hurricanes intensified, wildfires raged with unprecedented ferocity, and entire ecosystems began to collapse. At the same time, the political and corporate opposition to Emma's technology was intensifying. The battle over the carbon converter had now reached a critical tipping point. If Emma and her team failed to act decisively, they could lose everything they had worked for, leaving the world to face the consequences alone. Emma sat in her office late one night, reviewing the data coming in from around the world. The numbers were clear. Air quality in some major cities had dropped to catastrophic levels. In New Delhi, Beijing, and Sao Paulo, air pollution had reached levels so severe that public health was being threatened on an almost daily basis. Meanwhile, parts of the Arctic were warming at a pace faster than any scientist had predicted, accelerating ice melt and triggering an avalanche of environmental disasters in previously stable regions. As the news spread, a new wave of public outcry emerged. Citizens were taking to the streets, demanding action. People from all walks of life, scientists, activists, school children, and everyday citizens, were calling for governments and industries to take immediate steps to mitigate the damage. Social media buzzed with stories of the carbon converter and its potential, but so too did the relentless criticisms of its unproven status. Emma knew that they were quickly running out of time. There was no room for delays, no margin for error. If they didn't find a way to scale production and begin installing the carbon converters at the necessary rate, the situation would only get worse. Her phone rang. It was Elon. "Emma," he said urgently, his voice heavy with frustration, "I just got off a call with some of the top political leaders in the U.S. They're doubling down on their opposition to the technology. They've even started putting pressure on the other governments to back off. They're trying to slow us down with more bureaucracy, more regulations, and more red tape. Emma's stomach tightened. I knew it would come to this, but we don't have time for political games. If we don't act now, we'll be too late. Elon's voice softened. I know, and we will. But we need more than just technology at this point. We need global mobilization, an undeniable shift in the way people view this crisis. Emma nodded, even though he couldn't see her. We need to go beyond just proving the technology works. We need to make it clear that this isn't a choice anymore. It's a necessity. If we don't change the narrative, nothing will ever move forward. The next few days were a blur of activity. Emma, Elon, and their respective teams brainstormed new strategies, not just to fight political opposition, but to bring the global public on their side. They knew that they needed more than just corporate backing and political support. They needed a worldwide movement. Emma's first step was to reach out to her growing network of scientists, environmental advocates, and forward-thinking leaders. Dr. Jacqueline Turner had already spoken out in favor of the technology, but Emma now wanted to build a larger coalition, one that could unite people from all walks of life behind the carbon converter. The idea for the global carbon revolution was born. The global carbon revolution would be a unified global effort to push for the widespread adoption of the carbon converter, with the goal of reducing emissions on a scale that governments and corporations could no longer ignore. Emma, with Elon's support, would lead the charge, but the initiative would be decentralized, empowering local communities and organizations to take ownership of the effort. It was a risky move, but if the momentum for action could be shifted from the political elites to the global citizens, they could break the bottleneck that was strangling progress. The global carbon revolution launched with a powerful announcement, a joint declaration supported by over 100 leading environmental scientists, activists, and industry leaders. The message was clear. The technology was here, it was effective, and it had to be scaled immediately to address the climate emergency. Emma and Elon appeared together in a live-streamed event watched by millions across the globe. Emma's voice was steady but impassioned as she spoke directly to the camera. The carbon converter represents more than just a new piece of technology. It's a turning point, a moment where we can either continue down the path of destruction or choose to act decisively for the future of our planet. The science is clear, the need is urgent, and the time to act is now. We have the solution, and we will not wait any longer for those who are content with the status quo. Elon stood beside her, his presence adding weight to the message. This is no longer a debate about whether we can afford to invest in clean energy. This is a question of whether we can afford not to. We are living in the reality of climate change, and we all have a responsibility to step up and do what is necessary. The broadcast ended, but the ripple effect had just begun. Within hours, social media exploded with support for the movement. Activists organized rallies in major cities around the world, calling on governments to adopt the technology. Influencers with millions of followers joined the campaign, encouraging their audiences to sign petitions and pressure their leaders to act. But for every new supporter, there was an equally vocal opponent. In Washington, D.C., a coalition of fossil fuel lobbyists and conservative lawmakers began pushing back even harder. Their message was simple. The carbon converter was an unproven technology that couldn't be trusted. They spread misinformation, citing misleading reports and exaggerating risks to public health. Emma and her team were bombarded with negative press. Certain media outlets, especially those with ties to the fossil fuel industry, launched full-scale attacks against her and Elon. They claimed that the carbon converter could ruin economies and disrupt industries without providing any real evidence to back up these claims. The backlash was particularly fierce in the United States, where states with powerful fossil fuel industries, like Texas and West Virginia, began to reject the idea of transitioning away from traditional energy sources. At the same time, European governments, particularly those heavily invested in renewable energy, began moving forward more aggressively, promising to be early adopters of the technology. Emma felt the weight of the opposition, but it only strengthened her resolve. She was no longer just fighting for a technology, she was fighting for a new future. Weeks passed, and the situation seemed increasingly dire. But then, in a stunning turn of events, an unprecedented agreement was reached at the United Nations. In a rare moment of bipartisan support, representatives from over 50 countries, spanning both developed and developing nations, signed a global accord in favor of the carbon converter. The agreement, called the International Carbon Cleanup Pact, laid out a roadmap for worldwide collaboration in scaling the technology. It included provisions for funding, technology transfer, and a commitment to reducing carbon emissions by 40% within the next decade. The pact was a monumental achievement, and it represented a massive shift in the way the world viewed the climate crisis. The significance of the pact was clear. The carbon converter was no longer just an idea, it was now a global imperative. Despite the victory at the UN, Emma knew the fight was far from over. The road ahead was still filled with obstacles, from corporate resistance to logistical hurdles in scaling production. But with the global movement behind her and the support of thousands of activists, scientists, and citizens, Emma felt more confident than ever that they were on the right path. The next chapter in the fight against climate change had just begun, and as Emma looked to the future, she knew one thing for certain. The carbon converter was only the beginning. The real work, the real change, was just getting started. With the launch of the International Carbon Cleanup Pact, Emma felt a sense of cautious optimism. The path forward was clearer than it had been in months. The world was now, more than ever, committed to solving the climate crisis, and the carbon converter was at the forefront of that mission. However, even as the global movement gained momentum, the challenges intensified. The political opposition was far from defeated, and the logistical hurdles to scaling the technology were immense. As the pact took root, Emma's focus shifted from advocacy to implementation. The stakes were higher than ever. This was no longer just about a solution. It was about delivering that solution on a global scale at a time when the world could not afford any more delays. The first major test of the carbon converter's scalability came with the deployment of the technology to pilot regions across the world. Emma and her team had selected 5 cities, ranging from heavily industrialized metropolises like Chicago and Beijing to smaller, high-risk cities like Jakarta and Nairobi, that would serve as testing grounds for the technology's effectiveness at a large scale. The initial deployment was far from easy. The logistics were daunting. The need for rapid manufacturing, transport, and installation of the units was overwhelming. Emma's phone buzzed constantly with updates, delays in shipping, issues with local infrastructure, and resistance from local governments reluctant to change their energy systems. In Beijing, workers faced protests by coal miners who feared job losses. In Jakarta, the local government hesitated to approve installation permits because of bureaucratic inertia. Even in Chicago, the deployment team had to contend with intense scrutiny from environmental groups skeptical of the technology's ability to meet its lofty promises. But despite the opposition, the first converters were successfully installed in each city. The results, however, were not immediately clear. Emma had prepared herself for a slow burn. After all, no monumental technological change was ever easy. But the anticipation weighed heavily on her shoulders. She knew that the success or failure of these pilots would determine whether they could meet their goal of scaling the technology to hundreds of cities within the year. It wasn't long before the first major setback occurred. In Jakarta, the carbon converters that had been installed along the city's busiest roads and power plants were malfunctioning. Reports came in that the units, instead of absorbing the expected levels of carbon dioxide, were producing harmful byproducts. There were fears that the units might be contaminating the air with toxic substances, a nightmare scenario for a project already under heavy scrutiny. Emma was on the phone with her lead engineer, David, who had been working tirelessly to manage the deployment. "We're trying to track the issue, but it's spreading too quickly," David said, his voice tense. "It looks like there was a calibration error in the initial installation. The units weren't set to filter out certain gases properly." Emma's mind raced. If this problem couldn't be solved quickly, the backlash would be catastrophic. The media would seize on the failure, and political opponents would use it to argue that the technology was unreliable and dangerous. This was a critical moment. She couldn't afford to falter. "Okay, David, we need to get this fixed immediately," Emma said. "Can we recalibrate them remotely? We're already working on a patch. We should have it resolved in 24 to 48 hours, he replied. "But I'm not sure how much damage has already been done. The city officials are getting antsy, and the local press is starting to pick up the story." Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was a disaster, but it was one they could fix. She made the decision to fly to Jakarta herself, to personally oversee the resolution. She called Elon. Elon, we've got a problem in Jakarta. There's been a malfunction with the carbon converters. If we don't fix it soon, this could set the whole project back by months. Elon was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Get there as fast as you can. We can't afford to lose this battle." Arriving in Jakarta, Emma was met by a team of engineers and local officials who were already working to fix the calibration issue. The city was on edge. Rumors of the malfunction had begun to spread, and public trust was teetering on the edge. Emma sat with the local government officials, trying to calm their fears while reassuring them that the issue was under control. "We understand the concerns, but we're working around the clock to fix the problem," Emma said, speaking in front of a small crowd of journalists. "The technology is new, and with new technology comes the potential for hiccups. But I promise you, this is a temporary setback. The carbon converter is the best solution we have to address climate change, and we will make it work." The press was skeptical, and their questions were relentless. How can the public trust that this technology is safe if it's already malfunctioning on the first deployment? One journalist asked. Emma's mind raced for the right words. "Because we're committed to transparency. We've identified the problem, and we are already fixing it. We've got the world's brightest minds working on this, and we're not stopping until this works. The planet's future depends on it." Within 48 hours, the engineers had corrected the calibration issue, and the malfunctioning converters were restored to full functionality. The news came just in time, as the local press had begun to calm down after Emma's reassurances. But the global attention on the situation had put the technology's credibility on the line. Emma and her team knew that they had narrowly avoided disaster, but the larger question loomed. Could they sustain this pace of innovation and deployment? In Jakarta, the air quality improved dramatically over the next few weeks, and the converters began to show their true potential. The unit's ability to reduce carbon emissions was undeniable. Local officials, initially skeptical, were now praising the technology, and the public's anxiety began to subside. The crisis in Jakarta had been a wake-up call, but Emma knew that the battle wasn't just about the technology, it was also about the media narrative. Around the world, climate skeptics and fossil fuel lobbyists had seized upon the Jakarta incident as proof that the carbon converter was too risky to be trusted on a global scale. Emma couldn't afford for the media to control the conversation. She needed to fight back. She held a press conference, this time with several prominent climate scientists and environmental advocates at her side. The Jakarta issue was a technical problem, not a fatal flaw in the technology, she said firmly, addressing a packed room of journalists. "We've solved it, and we're moving forward with full confidence in the carbon converter's ability to mitigate emissions. This is the future, and we can't afford to waste time with fear-mongering." It was a turning point. The scientific community began to rally behind Emma's team, issuing statements of support and highlighting the incredible potential of the carbon converter to change the course of climate change. Even as the media had its doubts, the tide was slowly turning in Emma's favor. As the days turned into weeks, the crisis in Jakarta faded into history, but the world was watching closely. Emma and her team had weathered the first major storm of their global initiative, but the path ahead remained fraught with challenges, political, logistical, and technical. They had proved that they could deliver on their promises, but they knew that the real test was still to come. The world had started to believe in the carbon converter, but they still had to prove that it could scale on a global level. Emma sat in her office, reflecting on the chaos of the past few weeks. The stakes had never been higher. With the future of the planet hanging in the balance, Emma knew that the next chapter in the battle for the carbon converter would be even more critical. The technology had to work at a global scale. Failure was not an option. The tension in the air was palpable. The carbon converter had now been successfully deployed in multiple countries, but despite the breakthroughs, Emma couldn't ignore the fact that the battle was far from over. In fact, the true fight had only just begun. While her technology was gradually gaining global recognition, the political opposition was becoming more desperate. In the corridors of power, fossil fuel lobbyists were working overtime, trying to stall progress by spreading doubt and confusion. But the clock was ticking. With every passing day, the planet's situation grew more dire. While some countries were beginning to adopt the carbon converter on a large scale, Others were still hesitant, waiting for the right moment or looking for a way out. Emma knew that without greater international cooperation and a united front, the impact of the technology would remain limited. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a conservative U.S. senator named Samuel Carrington, a man who had previously been one of the most vocal critics of Emma's work. Carrington had built his political career on defending traditional industries and was deeply entrenched in the fossil fuel sector. To many, he was the embodiment of everything standing in the way of the carbon converter's success. His influence in Washington was immense, and he had spent months attacking the carbon converter, undermining Emma's credibility with every chance he got. So when Emma received a private invitation to meet with him, her first instinct was to refuse. She had no interest in negotiating with a man whose policies had done nothing but exacerbate the climate crisis. But after much deliberation, she realized that this could be the moment to turn the tide, to reach the one person who could potentially change the direction of the entire political debate. The meeting was set in a high-rise office in Washington, D.C. The atmosphere was formal, almost cold. When Emma arrived, Carrington was waiting for her, a stoic expression on his face. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he said, extending his hand. There was no smile, no warmth in his gesture, but Emma took his hand anyway, trying to read him. "I'll get straight to the point," Carrington continued, sitting behind his massive desk. "I'm sure you're aware of the mounting pressure against your technology. There's been too much opposition, too many risks. You've got politicians, scientists, and ordinary citizens all speaking out against it." Emma nodded, expecting the usual litany of complaints. "Yes, I'm aware. But I think the data and the results speak for themselves. The technology is working. We have real-world evidence that it's reducing emissions and improving air quality." Carrington steepled his fingers, his sharp eyes focused on Emma. "I'm not here to tell you that your technology doesn't have potential. But what I am telling you is that we have a problem. The issue isn't whether or not your carbon converter works. It's whether or not it's scalable in a way that doesn't collapse entire industries. You're talking about transitioning the global economy away from fossil fuels, and that's going to have real consequences. You're talking about job losses, economic disruption, and a massive shift in global markets. And we can't afford that right now, not when the world's economy is already fragile." Emma's mind raced. She knew the arguments he was making. These were the same talking points that had been used against renewable energy for decades. It wasn't about the technology. It was about the fear of change, the fear of losing power. "You're afraid of the unknown," Emma said bluntly. "But you know just as well as I do that the status quo isn't sustainable. The world is changing whether we like it or not. We can either be a part of that change or get left behind." Carrington didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze flickering over to a photo on the wall of his office, a picture of a vast oil refinery in the distance. Emma recognized the setting. It was a photograph of the very industry he had spent his life defending. "You think I don't know that?" Carrington finally spoke, his voice quieter now. "The truth is, I've spent my life defending a system that I thought was unbreakable. But I know something has to change. What I don't know is if your solution is the answer. You say we're running out of time, and I agree. But I also know that what you're proposing, scaling up something like this overnight, it could destabilize economies, it could create chaos." Emma didn't hesitate. "Senator, with all due respect, we've already seen what happens when we ignore the science. You've seen the wildfires, the droughts, the storms. We can't afford to wait any longer for a perfect solution. The carbon converter may not be flawless, but it's the best we've got. And it's working, in spite of the challenges." Carrington was quiet again, staring out the window as if lost in thought. Emma could sense he was grappling with something deeper than just politics. Finally, he spoke. "I'm not going to pretend that I'm suddenly convinced, but I'll tell you this. I don't think the solution lies in doing nothing. I'll work with you, not because I'm a convert, but because I understand that this is bigger than either of us. If this technology is going to be the future, we need to make sure it works for everyone, not just the environmentalists or the tech enthusiasts." Emma took a deep breath. She had not expected this. Carrington wasn't exactly an ally, but he was at least open to discussing a solution. And that, in this moment, was a huge win. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of negotiations. Carrington's change in attitude toward the technology wasn't just a personal shift. It had the potential to sway the opinions of many other skeptical lawmakers who were sitting on the fence. Emma and her team began working directly with Carrington to refine the strategy for the global deployment, addressing the concerns about economic impact and job displacement. Carrington pushed for a new initiative, a global transition fund aimed at helping industries and workers most affected by the shift away from fossil fuels. This fund would support retraining programs, investments in renewable energy jobs, and subsidies for companies transitioning to cleaner technologies. It was a delicate balance between environmental progress and economic stability, but Emma knew it was the right approach. With Carrington's newfound support, the media's narrative began to shift. What had once been a chorus of skepticism was now slowly becoming a story of hope and collaboration. The Global Transition Fund was gaining traction, and the carbon converter was no longer just a controversial technology. It was seen as a necessary step in the fight against climate change, with the support of both environmental advocates and cautious industry leaders. Emma knew that the battle wasn't over. She still faced challenges. Many countries were hesitant to make the necessary investments, and the pace of scaling the technology remained slow. But Carrington's involvement had given the project a credibility boost it desperately needed. Now, more and more lawmakers were willing to come to the table and find common ground. In the months that followed, Emma and her team worked tirelessly to scale the carbon converter, secure international agreements, and refine the technology. Every step was hard-won, and the road was long and fraught with setbacks. But Emma had learned something valuable in her journey. The fight against climate change wasn't just a battle of science. It was a battle of ideas, of narratives, and of politics. And with Carrington's support, the carbon converter had taken a significant step toward becoming a global solution. The road ahead would still be difficult, but Emma was no longer fighting it alone. The unlikely alliance with Carrington, the willingness of the political establishment to at least begin a conversation, and the momentum of the growing global movement made her more hopeful than ever. Months had passed since Emma's alliance with Senator Samuel Carrington, and the pace of change had accelerated. The Global Transition Fund was now up and running, and in cities across the globe, the carbon converters were steadily being integrated into the infrastructure of both developed and developing nations. The technology had begun to prove its worth on an unprecedented scale, and public opinion was slowly shifting in favor of real climate action. However, the final and most significant hurdle still loomed: gaining the commitment of every nation to adopt the carbon converter technology as a global solution. For Emma, the journey had been both humbling and harrowing. The setbacks, the personal sacrifices, and the pressure to deliver had been overwhelming at times. But in her heart, she knew that the world was on the verge of something extraordinary, a revolution in how humanity approached the climate crisis. And as the leader of this transformation, she was ready for whatever it took to bring it to fruition. The moment Emma had been waiting for had finally arrived: the Global Climate Summit. Leaders from nearly every nation were gathering in New York City for a historic meeting to discuss climate change solutions. This was it, the moment to make or break the carbon converter's future. Emma and her team had spent months preparing their presentation, and it was clear that this was the opportunity to convince the world's most powerful leaders to back the technology on a global scale. The summit was being held in the United Nations General Assembly Hall, a place where many of the world's greatest decisions had been made. The room was filled with politicians, environmental advocates, scientists, and business leaders. Emma had never felt more exposed in her life. For years, she had fought in the shadows, speaking to small groups and governments about the potential of her technology. But now, she would stand before the world, addressing a crowd that included climate change deniers, corporate moguls, and political heavyweights. Her heart pounded as she watched the clock tick down to her time slot. She had prepared for this moment in every way possible, memorizing every statistic, rehearsing her speech countless times, even envisioning the room's atmosphere. But nothing could have prepared her for the weight of the moment. The future of the planet was in her hands. Elon Musk, who had remained a steadfast supporter, sat in the front row, his face calm and focused. Emma locked eyes with him and gave a quick, reassuring smile. His presence was a comfort, a reminder that even in the face of immense challenges, she wasn't alone. When Emma stepped onto the stage, a hushed silence fell over the room. The world's attention was on her, and she could feel every eye on her as she adjusted the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of the moment. "Today, we face an unprecedented challenge: climate change. It is no longer a future problem. It is here, now, affecting every part of our planet. In the past, we focused on small steps: carbon taxes, renewable energy adoption, and efficiency programs. But today, I stand before you with something different, a solution that can begin to reverse the damage we've already done." She paused, allowing her words to settle. "For the past several years, my team and I have worked tirelessly on a technology that has the potential to drastically reduce carbon emissions and help repair the damage caused by centuries of industrialization. This technology is called the carbon converter, and it is already in use in cities across the world. We've seen the results: cleaner air, reduced carbon levels, and an opportunity for all of us to change the course of history." Emma walked over to the large screen behind her, which displayed a series of graphs showing the results of the carbon converter's impact in various test cities. "These numbers," she continued, pointing to the screen, "represent the future of our planet. If we continue to scale this technology and implement it worldwide, we can reduce atmospheric carbon by up to 40% within the next decade. That is not a dream. It is a reality, and it is within our grasp." She turned back to face the room. "I know there are fears. I know that there are concerns about job losses, economic upheaval, and technological risks. But let me make one thing clear: inaction is not a viable option. The cost of doing nothing is far greater than the cost of transitioning to a sustainable future." There was a murmur in the room. Emma could feel the room's collective tension. This was the tipping point, the moment when they would either embrace the future or stay stuck in the past. "But we cannot do it alone," Emma continued. "We need each and every one of you, every nation, every leader, every organization, to commit to making this transition happen. We need to create the Global Carbon Pact, an agreement that ensures the carbon converter is deployed on a massive scale, and that the transition to a clean energy economy is equitable, inclusive, and sustainable." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, Emma feared that her words had fallen flat. But then, the unexpected happened. It started with a slow clap, followed by a few scattered cheers. One by one, members of the assembly began to rise, showing their support. What began as a small group of enthusiastic supporters grew louder, and soon, the entire room was applauding. Emma stood, stunned. At first, the support she had hoped for, but feared might never come, was finally materializing. The leaders of nations, many of whom had been hesitant or openly opposed to the carbon converter, were now standing with her. They understood that the time for delay had passed. It was now or never. As the applause died down, the United Nations Secretary-General stood and addressed the assembly. "We have heard the call," he said, his voice clear and firm. "The need for global action is undeniable. The world is at a crossroads, and we must choose the path of cooperation, innovation, and sustainability. We commit today to working together to ensure that the carbon converter is deployed worldwide and that its benefits are shared by all." The room erupted into applause again, louder this time. Emma's heart swelled with relief and disbelief. This was it, the moment that would define her life's work. The Global Carbon Pact had been born, and with it, a new era of climate action. The days that followed the summit were a blur of press conferences, meetings with world leaders, and celebrations. But amidst all the noise, Emma couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. From the earliest days of her work, when she had been mocked and doubted, she had now brought the world to the brink of a historic shift. The carbon converters were being deployed at an unprecedented rate. Nations were putting aside their differences and working together to build a cleaner, more sustainable future. The Global Transition Fund was helping workers transition to new, green jobs, and industries were beginning to shift their focus toward renewable energy and sustainable practices. In the weeks following the summit, Emma received a message from Elon, congratulating her on the success. "This is just the beginning," he wrote. "You've changed the course of history. Now, let's make sure we never stop moving forward." As Emma stood on the rooftop of her office building, Gazing out at the skyline of New York City, she thought about everything that had led up to this moment. The challenges, the sacrifices, the doubts. Everything had been worth it. The carbon converter wasn't just a technology. It was a symbol of what humanity could achieve when it worked together. The world had stepped into a new era, one where innovation, hope, and collaboration were the driving forces behind the fight against climate change. And Emma knew that this was just the beginning. The path forward would still be full of challenges, but for the first time in her life, she felt truly hopeful for the future. Together, she whispered to herself, "We can change the world." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get